Okay, there you go. Good morning, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. We are meeting, this is the Electoral Areas Committee for March 9th. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we're meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And first item on our agenda, we have a Denman Housing Association delegation by Simon Palmer, I believe. And we're just going to bring that PowerPoint up. And Simon, can you hear and are you able to patch in?
Move receipt.
Yes, thank you. And are they unmuted? Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Good morning, members of the Electoral Area Services Committee. My name is Simon Palmer. I chair the Denman Housing Association, incorporated in October 2012, with a constitution that states our purpose as, quote, to relieve poverty by providing residential accommodation at below market rates for low and modest income households, unquote. Our currently 6-member board combines a range of skills and professional experience, ranging from my years in the Far East involved in building and operating ships, to our treasurer, who has extensive board experience in that role, our secretary, who is an online learning solutions consultant, another board member who manages some 1,200 units of commercial and residential properties in Richmond, and another who heads a company manufacturing very large capacity pumps and owns a second focused on installing solar arrays for off-grid and grid-type purposes. In November 2013, we commissioned a study that found 120 people on Denman, including 20 children, in need of decent, affordable housing. 120 people represents over 10% of the island's population. In June 2018, the Islands Trust Housing Needs Assessment stated, quote, that Denman Island now requires up to 80 affordable housing units, unquote. So the need was established. And who are these people? They're the working backbone of the island, the home care workers, the staff in the general store, bookstore, hardware store, volunteer firemen, construction workers, gardeners, maintenance men and women, with an hourly wage range of $15 to $30. And this, I regret, is how many are obliged to live. See if that slide comes up there. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
The housing market on Denman is particularly tight just now. The cheapest house I could find last week was around $500,000. Even at half that price, it is unaffordable for such hourly wage workers. So Denman Housing Association began to look for land on Denman, where over 40% is in the ALR, 10% or so is parkland or conservancy, and the remaining land private and expensive. After 6 years of looking, trying to acquire land with no money, we fashioned a deal involving densities released by a generous friend to compensate the landowner for transferring title on some acreage to us. Our first shot at building affordable housing was frustrated by COVID, by the Ministry of Health, understandably focused on the pandemic, putting aside its guidance on the treatment of rainwater for potable purposes, a water system that we needed for rezoning approval, until we ran out of time with our agreement of intent with the landowner, who decided not to extend. It was a blow, a lot of hard work wasted and money spent. But from that loss, however, came opportunity. Just 1 month later, an offer of a far better site, a similar deal with densities that we have now made legal, for which we have just made a rezoning and subdivision application to Islands Trust. The new site is centrally located, as you can see, and large enough, 1.05 hectares, to accommodate 20 housing units we originally planned. The site is right there in the middle of the slide, 1151 Kirk. The units will be constructed to meet the highly energy efficient Step 4 building standards mandated by BC Housing. Additionally, we plan a solar array and a net metering arrangement with BC Hydro that will result in Denman Green achieving net zero energy efficiency. Add to that our maximizing treated rainwater for all indoor potable purposes, grey water reuse for toilet flushing, and a common laundry, and Denman Green will likely lay claim to being perhaps the most environmentally responsible and sustainable affordable housing project in BC. So this is the project for which I ask your support today. To meet short-term needs such as geotech and wastewater assessments, technical site plans, a water supply and usage plan, completed building plans, community engagement, housing agreement, legal costs, Islands Trust fees, and more, we estimate having an immediate funding shortfall of $10,000. Longer term, when it comes to funding building construction and infrastructure, we will be competing with other projects. And as you are no doubt aware, funding organizations such as BC Housing favor projects that have local government and community support. Our planned rainwater harvesting system will not only conserve groundwater, but will actually be a more reliable source as climate change results in shorter, wetter winters, increased runoff, and therefore less replenishment of groundwater sources. There is good science behind this progressive approach to supplying multifamily and multi-use buildings of all kinds with potable water. Denman Green could well prove a leader in this, an example to follow in urban settings also. Therefore, I ask that you kindly consider recommending to the board that it approve funding the rainwater storage and system of Denman Green. When the time comes, the cost of which we estimate as $200,000. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. We have a question from Director Arbor.
Oh, I'm a little off center today with the camera. I'm gonna move chairs. That's better. Oh, I could have used that mic. Thank you, Simon, for this excellent presentation. And I know there's been a ton of discussion around the current housing crisis on Denman. And I've been really impressed in the last 2 years by all the work that Denman Green has put in on the old site. And I agree with you, it was disappointing when that other site didn't end up panning out. And I absolutely agree with you that the new site has absolutely all the elements that should make for a very successful project. And I'm really pleased to see that this is coming together and that you'll hopefully be able to carry a lot of the conceptual work that's been done with BC Housing and Macola into this new site. I imagine that the last slide, Simon, can you correct me? Are those the Beulah Creek units, or they're drawings of your own?
No, they are the Beulah Creek on Hornby Island. And
yes.
The reason I'm projecting them is that the design has already been done. BC Housing's specifications have been followed, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
At a discussion with the development consultant, Macola, we agreed that it would be most economic to use the same designs. There's no point in reinventing the wheel for some vanity purposes.
Absolutely, and to see that collaboration. So for those here, it's interesting because obviously the Islands is covered by the Islands Trust, so a lot of the housing work is and bylaws and all the rest of this is quite foreign to the regional district. Even when you talk about density trading, that's something that happens on Denman at the local trust committee, but does not happen on Hornby. And so there's some uniqueness to the opportunities. But I think for Denman, in the context of Denman with the Allen's Trust, this project seems to fit perfectly well and will bring about other affordable aspects to the project in terms of walkability, closeness to school, closeness to the ferry. I mean, it's just fantastic. And to be able to leverage the designs from Beulah Creek on Hornby, it's a similar land footprint. So the trick for the CVRD is our housing function does not apply to the island. So we'll have I'll ask staff to see if there's ways to support you. I know we did on with the Hornby project. We were able to bring it to where it's at using the ECDEV function, and I know the ECDEV function has been used for the Denman Green project as well. So, Simon, I just saw that we're also being requested some help from DCLTA as well through the Rural Community Grants. So I think they've got an application in the hopper with us. But this is that one is for senior housing. So overall, maybe I'd look to staff to see if in the short term there's a way that we're able to identify, to consider your request and to see if we could fund it in some manner. And then for the rainwater and all that, I like that you're challenging us on it. I think that'll be a bit further down the road as you get your as you secure the property number one. I guess it's probably the number one item for this year, and then second, to make sure that BC Housing, McCullough, all those people are fully on board and that you receive some kind of confirmation of funding. But at that point, later on in a number of months, I would be quite happy for us to see if there's a role for us to play as well beyond that in some of the items that may not be covered. Again, bearing in mind it's hard from the CVRD because we don't have a function specific to housing on the islands. But yeah, I don't know if others have comments. I know for staff those are always a little tricky for the islands, but there's no doubt in my mind that both project, the Beulah Creek and this one proposed downtown, are going to be quite consequential, and I know are identified in both communities as the highest ranked priority for the residents of the island. So thank you for your presentation, and we'll see what we can do. I don't know if I'll return it to the chair, see if there's more comments.
Thanks, Director Ever. I see Director Grieve has a question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and through to our presenter. Mr. Palmer, I mean, you showed great tenacity in snatching victory from the jaws of defeat here. And kudos to you and the group for persevering on this. I guess my only question, I see, you got some creative ideas around water, but is there a local water system nearby, or are you going to have to prove water on the site?
There is actually a well which, over a 3-hour pump test a couple of weeks ago, proved out at 3 gallons a minute. And we are in the next 2-3 weeks going to be doing a more extensive test required by Islands Trust of a 72-hour pump test, including an impact assessment on 4 nearby wells. So at a minimum, there is a productive well, and the Island Health very recently approved 134 liters per person per day for indoor potable use, provided we install the grey water for toilet flushing.
Yes.
And at that level of consumption, 134 liters per person per day, we actually only require 1.02 US gallons a minute out of the well. That's if we only used well water. So our proposal is to have rainwater as the primary purpose and the well water as a secondary backup source.
Yeah, very impressive, and certainly you're forging ahead into some uncharted territory, and we'll watch with great interest how this progresses. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Director Grieve. And I just had a couple of questions myself. I too would like to congratulate you on the very innovative design of your housing project, especially around rainwater, and knowing what an issue that is on Denman. So I guess one question is Islands Trust also providing you a letter of support? Has that already been cleared?
Yeah, Islands Trust, local trust committee provided us with a letter of support quite some time ago. And both of our local trustees have individually expressed support. And our application, as I said, has been put in, and I expect it to come before the local trust committee at their May 4 meeting.
Okay, great. It sounds like a letter of support from the full board is probably what you are looking for, if it's going to BC Housing. Can I just clarify that?
Yeah, that would be very useful, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. And then in terms of, I mean, I saw sort of two short-term ask for your geotech plans of 10,000, and then the long-term ask of 200 for the rainwater harvest. And I think Director Arbor's right that we'll have to look at something in the long term, and we can't do any promises there. But I'm assuming in the short term, possibly something through grant and aid, or to that matter, I think Director Arbor did explain some of the intricacies or the difficulty because of the housing function not extending to Denman. So maybe staff can help us figure out what funding sources, unless staff have already had a look at this.
I think it would be advantageous for staff to have more details from Simon as to the specifics of the ask and when, and for us to look at that and come back to you with respect to the funding end of things. But by all means, a letter of support is something that you can recommend to the board and have them endorse.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any. Oh, do you have another question, Director Arbor?
Yeah, thanks. So would it be appropriate later on the new business to put that request to staff? And I do have small concerns to both staff and Simon, in that again, just having received the package in the last couple of days of the applications coming from Denman, it's a higher volume than than I think historically, and two of them are for housing projects. So when I put the request, I think I'd asked to put a little asterisk that I think we need to put our minds to how to best support housing on Denman. But would a motion be useful later on in the meeting, CEO, or?
Yeah, for that letter of support and to ask staff to come back with further information regarding the funding. Yes. Under new business? Under
new business, I can add that. Okay. And I don't see any other questions. So on receipt, is there anyone opposed? And that is carried. And I'll thank you, Mr. Palmer, for your presentation.
Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Moving on, we have under petitions and delegations. Oh, am I right? Oh, that's right. The management report. Thank you.
I'll move that.
Moved and seconded. Are there any comments or questions on the management report? Seeing none. Anyone opposed to receipt? And that is carried. And we have public input on the 2021-2025 financial plan for receipt. Moved. And I can second. And over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And we do have a couple of final proposed budgets to present to you later on. And just to report that we have no public input to share with you regarding the previous reports and those that are on the agenda today.
I'm hoping that's a sign of good electoral support. I hope people are paying attention. Any questions about that report? Hearing none. On receipt, anyone opposed? And that's carried. All right. Section E, number 1, Veterans Homelessness Support Funding Options for receipt.
Move one.
Moved and seconded. And over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Doug DeMarzo, General Manager of Community Services, will give a brief presentation and answer any of your questions regarding this report.
Before you go, Doug, can everyone still sort of hear us at least? Oh, here we're back. Okay, technical issue. Poor Lisa, sorry. Over to Doug.
Thank you, Chair, and to the directors. This responds to an earlier request by the Royal Canadian Legion to look at funding options for aiding them with homelessness of veterans. Essentially, in 2015, the Comox Valley Regional District established the Homeless Support Services. And through that, the allocation of Cvrd funding is based on recommendations of that coalition and doesn't really specifically target any individual groups. So one of the suggested options here is to send the Royal Canadian Legion a letter in response, encouraging them to work with this coalition to end homelessness and reach out through those groups to work within the community. I think I'll just end it there and open for questions.
Okay, Director Arbor?
Yeah, thanks. I think there was a lot of support for the request last time, but I also think that the staff report does a good job of regrounding us into thinking about our existing vehicle for support to housing initiatives in the valley, not for the islands there, but yeah. So I think it's probably the right venue to refer back, to provide a strong letter of support, but also to refer back to the coalition. I did see that Cumberland did make the decision to make a contribution on the spot, but maybe that is where the value of us having a good second thought and thinking about the best way, if we want to support organizations like that. It's true that then we might have a number of other housing association come forward with similar compelling cases. So I think the staff recommendation I'm in support of, to just write a strong letter of support to their efforts, but also refer them back to the coalition. Thanks.
I don't see any other questions. So on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. And moving on to the advisory planning commissions, the minutes for Area B APC for receipt. Moved
Second.
and seconded. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, that's carried. And then now the Area B development variance DV1B21 for 2086 Hector Road for receipt. Moved
Second.
and second, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Dylan Thiessen is here from the Planning Department to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, Russell, and thank you for your time today, directors and members of the EASC. This DVP application you have before you has been received to reduce the front yard setback to allow for the construction of a carriage house. The variance sought is from 7.5 meters to 5 meters for the foundation of the building, and from 5.5 meters to 4.25 meters, or 4 1/4, for the eaves of the building. The subject property is approximately 0.2 hectares in size. It is zoned Country Residential 1 and designated as being within a settlement expansion area. It is bound by other CR1 zoned properties to the north and east, by Acacia Road to the west, and by Hector Road and the town of Comox to the south. The file was considered by Area B's Advisory Planning Commission at their meeting on February 16th of this year. The APC voted in opposition to the application at their meeting, as an approximate location of the septic tank was provided at the time, and members were concerned about the proximity of the septic tank to the driveway, given that the tank's location was not exact. Staff reassured APC members and would like to reassure the directors here today that any septic tank upgrades or new installations would be done by a professional and approved by the Vancouver Island Health Authority. Staff have also since received more precise measurements about the tank's exact location. Staff sent letters to adjacent property owners within a 100-meter radius of the subject property, informing them of the variance request and providing owners and tenants an opportunity to comment on the request. Staff received no correspondence from the neighbors. Ultimately, staff recommend that the variance be approved, as sightlines that increase vehicular and pedestrian safety are still maintained. The variance is not likely to alter the rural farming character of the surrounding development. Privacy concerns are mitigated since the standard rear and side yard setbacks are maintained and sufficient space remains for the maintenance of the buildings. I see, I think that the applicant, Lori Willis, is with us over Zoom. And so either of us would be available to answer your questions.
Thanks, Dylan. And Laurie, would you like to make any comments? Well, yeah, you're still muted. But in the meantime, I was at the ABC, and I didn't also hear any objections to the setbacks in accordance to the sight lines or anything like that. Much of the discussion was around the turning radius between the driveway and where the septic field was. And so I think that's probably where the APC got a little bit stuck. And so I'm really glad that staff have had a look at where the septic tank is. And, with the assurance of Island Health, obviously putting in or approving a septic tank that is positioned correctly and of the right amount of volume, I didn't have any problems with the application. Laurie, are you able to comment?
Yes, I'm sorry. This is my second Zoom conference, so I'm a little bit of a rookie. I think pretty much Dylan's covered everything. I'm obviously, if there's any questions, I'll answer it best of my knowledge. But I think, like I say, Dylan's covered pretty much everything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't actually see any questions or comments here, so I'll formally excuse you from the table. And on receipt, is there anyone opposed? And that's carried. And there is a recommendation. It's moved, and I can second, to approve the DVP for Willis Zimmerman, according to all of the setbacks. And finally, that the corporate legislative officer be authorized to execute the permit. Is anyone opposed to that recommendation? Hearing none, that is carried. Thank you, everyone. All right, moving on. We have the Comox Valley Food Hub feasibility assessment update for receipt. Moved.
Move update.
Seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Jody McLean is here to present this report. He will be supported by Janine de La Salle of the Urban Food Strategies, who is the consultant assisting on this project.
Hi, thank you. So the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries and the Comox Valley Regional District agreed to undertake a feasibility assessment to evaluate the potential for establishing a regional food hub as part of the emerging provincial BC food hub network. The feasibility assessment is intended to review community appropriate options for governance, operations, and financing that can produce a self-sustaining facility, but also identifying anticipated risks, costs, and opportunities. Janine de La Salle of Urban Food Strategies has been retained to draft this assessment. Her and her team have completed similar assessments in regions across BC using a collaborative approach by engaging across sectors and disciplines to create evidence-based products. She's joined here on Zoom with her colleagues, Darren Stott and David Van Cedars, to summarize the project plan included in Appendix A of your package. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Maybe I'll turn it over to Janine if you want to explain a little bit about the project and your work plan.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. And we're really happy to be supporting the CVRD in developing this feasibility study for a food hub. So what I was going to do is just present the sort of goals and objectives of the project, as well as give you a kind of a bird's eye view of the workflow between now and July 1st, when this is all due back to the Ministry of Agriculture. So the goal for this assessment, and we pulled this right out of the documentation between the CVRD and the Ministry of Agriculture. So the goal of the Food Hub assessment is to promote collaboration among local food industry participants, explore opportunities to expand local food production, and prepare a business plan for a Comox Valley Food Hub, should one be deemed feasible. Some of the objectives within that goal are to engage key players in identifying existing food and agriculture assets related to initiatives and potential gaps, to determine if there's sufficient market potential demand for financially viable and revenue positive food hub, identify aquaculture and agriculture business needs and level of interest in participating in a food hub. And based on all this feedback that we receive, we will build and test a food hub model, and then we will apply a business plan to it. We are, as consultants, we are here to support the dialogue and to have a positive discourse on figuring out, what works, what could work here. So with that spirit of open-mindedness, we'll be considering a range of models, especially in early stages. Food hubs don't have to be one thing. They can be many different things. So we're going to be kind of taking an approach of considering things like food asset networks, which would be sort of a coordinated network of different food assets that would be connected to food businesses, like primary processing, distribution, things like that. We'd also be considering looking at hybrid models, economically hybrid models, where there's nonprofit functions integrated with for-profit functions, and thinking about that role, because we're aware there's a lot of work that's already been done in this space. And because of the, our early kind of research, and we already sort of knew this intuitively with the Comox Valley, and we've done work nearby, is that there's a lot going on in the region. The food system is very sophisticated and involves many scales and types of agri and aquaculture producers, process, and distributors. And we hope that the work plan I'll present to you in brief will help us to achieve the goals and objectives that we've set out for this. And I'll just pause in case anyone wanted to ask a question there. Otherwise, I will just provide a very brief overview of the three-phase work plan.
I don't see any questions, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so right now we're in phase 1, project launch and market review. This is where we're sort of getting our ducks in a row. This group is one of our first protocols to check in with and seek advice from. And this is kind of rolling from the project plan. And we're learning we need to be a little bit iterative with this project plan, because we would like to reach out to as many people and involve as many people sort of with quote unquote skin in the game in this process. So our team and our staff team at the CVRD are currently discussing an expansion of some of this scope. So right now we're doing reviewing of background documents, some of the business plans that have already been developed in the region for food hubs. We're developing some communication material to try and create a common sense of what we're trying to do with all of this work. And we're starting to identify our first round of consultation, which involves sort of a series of one-on-one check-in interviews with people that really need sort of we need advice from in terms of setting up the rest of the engagement properly as well. As part of this too, we're doing some of our market research, looking at trends, look at what's already been going on in the region. Considering we're looking at, aquatic and land-based food systems, there's a lot to consider with that. We do have a bit of a step up with the seafood side because we recently completed a similar piece for North Island College, and there was a lot of research there on not only ocean products, but also non-timber forest products, in addition to farming products. So after we do all of this discussion and research and inventorying of assets, we're going to document those findings in a phase 1 report that we will present to the project working group, which doesn't exist yet. And part of our motive of coming to you today is to seek some advice from you on who you think should be part of that group. And we'll get to that in a minute. So phase 2 is really about engaging key players in identifying assets and needs in the region vis-a-vis food business. And we have a series of engagement points through here, including a kind of a broad-based producer survey. We're going to continue to speak with people one-on-one over the phone. COVID has been a real bummer from the engagement side, as I'm sure you all can appreciate as well. But we do find speaking with people one-on-one over the phone or using Zoom is actually generates very high quality information that allows us to do a better job. So that's actually been a benefit in terms of ramping up how many of those interviews we've been doing on projects. And we actually quite like doing those and find that they can be incredibly helpful. So that's one thing we rely on. We'll also be, learning a little bit further through that engagement, who we need to speak with in small groups. There's a lot of organizations working to promote local food systems in the region, and we want to make sure that we're able to connect not only with sort of this quote unquote skin in the game from a business perspective players, but also the many advocacy groups that represent larger groups of producers, processors, and people involved in the food system. So at that point, we'll pause and give an update to the working group. After that, we'll take any of that feedback and continue on with doing more assessment on infrastructure gaps and opportunities. We'll be looking at governance, ownership, and staffing structure options. So what's the universe of options around governance? Because oftentimes that's one of the major sticking points for Food Hub implementation is really, at the end of the day, who's going to own it, who's going to run it. We'll be also looking at that point at any location options that we're learning make sense to consider, and we'll develop some criteria for assessing different sites to see how they score. Again, we'll pull that all together into a phase 2 findings report that we will then present and discuss with a working group at that point. And then when we go into phase 3, at this point, we have most of the information we need, both from the research and from the engagement. And so we'll be pulling that together and describing a Food Hub model. Then we'll use that model to start describing some of the sub-elements like governance, ownership, staffing, facilities, equipment, and services, marketing and communications. And with that grouped and kind of described, that we'll be prepared to start putting some numbers down and looking at a sort of a 3-year financial plan to break even, as well as sort of identifying some of those funding sources. I'm sure you've been following the headlines that food hubs are getting funding right now. So you might be, if the stars align, that could be something that is very fundable. At that point, we'll again reconnect with the working group. As you can see, the working group has five meetings in total as part of this project. It's a very important part of the work. From there, we'll draft the final report, workshop it again, present it to the working group, and finalize the report with CVRD staff. And that'll be ready at that point then to be presented as the powers that be wish to proceed. And we don't necessarily have that part of it nailed down yet, but the report will be ready to be presented at that point and submitted to the Ministry of Agriculture. Those deadlines are pretty firm. So that's sort of this project in a nutshell. From our perspective, we're very early on here. So I would just welcome any comments, any words of advice you have for us, and any suggestions on who you think should be part of that working group.
Thanks, Janine. Director Arbor has a question or comment.
Thanks. And just a small tech issue. I see that my mic still always steals the camera from the chair, which makes it very hard for me to get in the lineup, because then I would steal. So anyways, I don't know if we'll ever solve that one, but it's, thank you so much for the presentation. And I think there's a lot of hopeful expectations in the Valley around this project. It's been kicked around and discussed for a couple of years. I think it's very exciting, and I like the sort of aggressive timeline is when I looked at the plan to be completed by June is wonderful, realizing that there's, as you say, a lot of opportunities regarding the space. I imagine an assumption I didn't see in the report. I guess we're fitting this one under RGS. Is that where it's living as a project, or? it's just living generally under the Comox Valley Regional District or economic development or?
Alana can answer that question.
Okay.
Through Madam Chair to the directors, we're looking at this feasibility work through our electoral area long-range planning function, function 503.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's good to know. And yeah, so that's good. And I mean, because you seem to be targeting agriculture as well, I'll have quite a bit of an interest in seeing what comes out of it. And when you ask about the working group and things like that, I'm hopeful that Comox First Nation will be highly interested and engaged in this project. They have interest in agriculture. They have a big community garden, related businesses. So when I look at the initial list, it said First Nation businesses. Maybe that covers it. And I just have a general question: whether you've already rolled up your sleeves and started looking at some of the reports, because I know about 6 months or 8 months ago, or maybe a little longer than that, we did receive an extensive report from 2 consultants related to Cvrds regarding the food space. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that and if you would have comments of what you expect may carry or not carry from that work. That'd be my only question.
Thank you, Director Arbour. We have seen a couple of applications for agriculture food hubs, but we haven't seen the seabeds ones. So I think that would be important for us to review.
I believe that was under the Innovate 2030 sort of report. So it's kind of embedded in there. I think that's what Director Arbour's, and I'm seeing nodding. That's what he was referring to.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I will be sure to get that into our review.
Great. Director Grieve?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. DeSalle. This is, as you say, very expedient timelines to put something like this together. My question is further to Director Arbour's, and that the funding source for this, my understanding it's the ministry itself is funding 30,000. Is that right? And I just heard that the electoral areas are funding the rest. But I'm just wondering, with the funding from the ministry, is it electoral area specific? Is this a funding stream that's available to electoral areas only?
I'll have Alana Mullally comment on the funding.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. So we have entered into an agreement with the Ministry of Agriculture to support this. Think about this as the phase 1, the feasibility, the planning side of the project. And we haven't committed any funding from the electoral area functions to that. Rather, we're looking at hopefully having a project that's fully funded on the feasibility side from the Ministry of Agriculture. You might have noted Janine's comment about recognition that some further engagement work might be required. And so we're going to take a look at that proposal and we might suggest that there is some additional funding that should come from Function 503. But as it stands right now, the agreement with the ministry is that the ministry will provide funding for this feasibility work. And that money will be released to us as we hit the key milestones that are outlined in our agreement. Certainly going forward, when we're looking at implementation, that is another big discussion that we'll need to have with you. And that really, that will unfold as we go, as Janine said, developing that governance model, who will own it, who will run it, etc. And we understand that we should be keeping our eyes out for funding opportunities for food hub infrastructure, if indeed we are successful in this first round and the Comox Valley indeed wants us to pursue a food hub. Thank you.
Well, I would just comment that, far be it from me to raise any objections or put any roadblocks in front of this initiative. I think we've all learned our lesson that when the NICE ministry gives you a funding opportunity, you parrot back exactly what the NICE ministry wants to see. My concern is that if we're going to be putting EA funds into this, it should be under a function that is paid into by the entire regional district, Because even the regional growth strategy doesn't accomplish that because Cumberland's not in it. Because chances are that the advantages of this project are going to lie strictly within a municipality at the end of the day. Anyway, so thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to clarify that Cumberland does participate in the RGS. The only entities that don't within our regional district are the islands, Denman and Hornby. And just to confirm once again that the funding for this project is entirely from the grant funding, unless we come back to you with a suggestion, at which time if there's other alternatives that you would like to see a broader participation in the funding, you could definitely propose that to the board. We'll work with you on that. And we want to clarify too that while the ministry provides us the criteria by which the study will be undertaken, it is very much the consultants that will help finalize the recommendations, and they will be driven by the input. And this study will only be as good as those that come to the table and assist us to provide the best possible input as to what the opportunities are here in the Valley.
Thanks to staff for that. As you know, I am very excited about this project. It is something that I too have been asking for, for this region to have an asset like a food hub. So thanks to the ministry for enabling us to make this happen. I do have a few questions for you, Janine. You mentioned something about an expansion of scope, and it just judging by your work plan, I was a little bit worried when you said that because I see how very it's quite extensive. Would you mind just expanding on what that was?
Yes, absolutely, Madam Chair, no problem. It's really what we've been learning so far is there's a lot of interest for groups to be engaged in this process. So for example, the Comox Valley Food Policy Council is interested in having sort of a workshop, which we're very keen to do, and we really appreciate the proactive role that the Food Policy Council has taken. However, in order to ensure equitable engagement, we would consider the need to do that for every group, including the Farmers Institutes, the industry associations, etc. And we simply don't have that identified in our scope at this point. We have, I think, we said we had 2 small group workshops. We've also been requested to give presentations to different organizations, which was not included in our work plans. So we're happy to be flexible, I think is the key message. We believe that reaching out to as many people as possible, even if they fall squarely within that food economy realm or outside of it, like the Food Policy Council, like the Farmers Institutes, we want to make sure we have enough scope and mandate to be able to connect with those groups as well. We don't want to leave anyone out. So our recommendation would be to just the scope would be on allowing us to speak with more people and reach out further, as well as adapt the work plan, the engagement plan. As in past projects, we found quick surveys within a specific industry sector is actually a lot more effective than trying to get people to a meeting. So in the spirit of trying to be as inclusive as possible, we just saw the need to allow us to have a few more of those points of contact with people.
Well, that sounds exciting. I mean, rather than trying to beat the bushes to find people, it sounds like you're already being asked quite a lot for engagement. And is that what a potential increase in budget might be used for? Or do you think that you could do that expansion of scope within the budget you've been given?
No, we would need an expanded scope for that. Our work plan is very specific with hours allocated per task. And this would be outside of that scope, significantly outside of that scope. So yeah, that would the entirety of the expansion proposal would just really, and it's in front of staff right now as sort of an a la carte option. Again, we're happy to stick with the original work plan. It just means we won't be able to, have a workshop with the food policy councils of the world, because we need to focus on people with actual investment in this sector, the business sector specifically. Because at the end of the day, we need to know who can pay and who wants to come and for what services. So that's the crux of the question we need to answer. In our opinion and professional opinion, is the business sector is the primary target in that engagement. But we absolutely recognize that there's immense value in all of the other organizations that are part of this. And we're just sort of suggesting that we be permitted to also engage with those groups, because it is a real ecosystem that you have, and it's quite unique and it's quite special. We believe this is a chance to create a positive dialogue around this process, and we're happy to help you to do that. But we're also happy to take a step back on that and just deliver on the original work plan as well. It's really up to the CVRD, yourselves and staff.
Okay. I am hearing your emphasis on the business community, whether it be farming or food processors. My concern is just, what role then does organizations like Lush Valley play? I mean, we did actually have a type of food hub operating this year out of our curling center, which my understanding put through almost $200,000 worth of food and distributed it to our community. Would you consider that organization also one of the key? You mentioned an economic hybrid, so I'm hoping that they're also being included in your...
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, sorry to cut you off, Madam Chair. Yes, no, we're super excited to connect with Lush Valley. We've actually already sat down with Marita and James to have a connect. So we would see Lush Valley, or an organization like Lush Valley, as a potential customer of the food hub. So because they themselves are organized as a nonprofit, wouldn't exclude them from being involved with the food hub and being integrated with kind of a regional, network of assets, because they would come and they would pay for services. They just happen to have their own governance structure that they're rolling with, which is great. Okay. So that's how I think we would approach that. Like if it's someone who might pay for services, that's who we want to talk to. So in our opinion, in speaking with Marita and James, that's absolutely what Lush Valley would be, as a potential customer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that they're being included there. I had a very interesting conversation with our school board chair, who made it be known to me that, as someone who's moved to the Valley relatively recently, it's been 10 years, I didn't realize that how many assets that the school board actually holds in the community. And I know you've mentioned, I think in your report, some of the publicly owned sites. So maybe I should confirm first, either from you or the rest of the consultants, when it comes to food hubs, generally the actual building site, or the building or the land itself, publicly owned, is that what we're looking at? And if so, the school board has a number of these assets, and because they do, and I had no idea there was actually a Comox Elementary School that is sitting fairly empty in Comox, that could potentially be looked at as a food hub site. So if publicly owned land is important to the model, perhaps bringing the school board in, either in the working group or as one of your key consultation groups, might be helpful so that we can get maybe a slightly broader range of sites where this can happen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's an excellent suggestion. At this point, I think our process would be to get all of the potential site options on the table and to assess them. And I think if it's public land and if there's a significant cost savings associated with that, then it would score, that would be part of the scoring that we would look at. So that's excellent. I will put that in our engagement plan. As I mentioned, we're still sort of solidifying that, because this is excellent advice. This is the type of advice we're looking for to help us make sure the engagement plan is as targeted and strategic as possible while being inclusive. So I will make a note of that. Is there anyone in particular you would suggest we speak with?
I think Sheila McDonald, probably the chair,
Okay.
having some of the longest experience, but also because she also does sit on the Food Policy Council and understands, what some of the needs of the community as they exist right now.
Okay.
I think she would probably be the best contact person.
Great.
And then just the last question. The distributed model was a model that I first heard about in the application that Cvrd put forward about a year ago. And I'm curious if you know of any communities that have done that kind of distributed model and how it works, because it seems almost going against the whole idea of a hub, having a sort of a centralized location. So do you know of any communities that do that kind of distributed model?
I don't have, just off the top of my head, not anything that's been formalized. Maybe Darren and David jump in if you put your hand up if you do have an example. I think the original food hub language really came from like a hub and spoke model, where you'd have a central facility with these kind of like satellites. And this model, instead of having a central kind of anchor, it would be all these assets somehow coordinated in a similar fashion, potentially with similar ownership, but it would allow, especially as a region-wide approach where you already have a lot of assets and you don't want to introduce something that brings in parasitic competition. It can't, it's a theoretical model to a large extent, but we actually think it has a lot more potential in some cases, especially if you're trying to coordinate a whole region and like add value for an entire region, as opposed to just one community within a region. So I hear the skepticism, and I'm with you on sort of like wondering like how, like, is there proof of concept with this? It's certainly something we could do. We have, a scope to do some research. So perhaps that's an area where we could more strategically focus our time and to look if we can find any best practices for us, for you on that.
Great. And I'm not sure if, I think I heard some of the other consultants wanting to contribute. No, maybe not.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to jump in. So I've still got time.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's a really good question. It's something we've been exploring more and more, especially with the rural projects we've been working on. And so this food hub network concept seems to be driven down in the States. And there's some really good examples down there, one in particular, South Carolina. And they recognize that, especially in rural areas, that the infrastructure, one, is spread out, but also, the customer base is also spread out and the producers are also spread out. So this hub and spoke model seems to be more and more popular because there seems to be a certain threshold that's needed to achieve to make food hubs or food hub networks viable from a financial perspective. So that collaboration and economies of scale needs to be brought together, especially in rural areas. So it's something we're exploring more and more. And Northeast states as well is also working on initiatives and bringing food hubs together and relying on infrastructure in different areas and expertise and needs within certain areas as well.
Well, thank you for that. I don't see any other questions. So thank you all for helping us move forward on the Food Hub project. I really look forward to seeing both the interim report and the final report. So seeing that we don't have any other questions or comments on receipt. Is anyone opposed? And that is carried. All right. Moving on, we have the bylaw enforcement semi-annual and annual report.
Move report.
Moved, and I'll second, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Amanda Yasinski is here to present the report and answer any of your questions.
Good morning. Just before we start, I was going to ask Lisa if you could bring up the graph on the last page. It's a short report, but the graph has an overview of each complaint for each electoral area throughout 2020. Through the CAO to the chair, this is an overview of bylaw enforcement for the year 2020. What staff, type of files we had and how staff managed through the year. So the graph does depict, I'll get to that at the end, the graph does depict each type of complaint that we take in, and then we've broken it down for each electoral area. So you can see the differences and some similarities there. So for 2020, a total of 33 MTIs were issued for offenses such as dogs at large, illegal dumping, building, and unsightly properties. MTIs which were not paid, reduced to warning, or disputed were sent through to the Provincial Civil Resolution Tribunal for decision on collections and payment. To date, the CVRD has had a 100% success rate going through CRT with collecting outstanding fines and included any administration costs we may have incurred. Total fines collected in 2020 was $5,625. A legal dumping program received 92 reports through the Bylaw Department of dump sites in 2020, slightly down from 2019. Additionally, staff administrated provincial court prosecutions against 3 properties owned by Amondio Santos. Commenced prosecutions with an upcoming trial date of April 29th and 30th of 2021. These prosecutions are to address building violations, zoning issues, primarily occupancy of RVs are the zoning issues, and the overall condition of the properties through the unsightly premises bylaw. Additionally, the bylaw department was successful in obtaining a consent order on a Supreme Court application on a historic file relating to land use and unauthorized work and development permit areas. The use was related to storage, processing, and sale of aggregate material, and the deadline on that consent order to have the use stopped and some remediation work done is April 30th of 2021. In an effort to assist park staff with increased enforcement and visibility within CVRD parks, bylaw staff opened 5 files based on specific complaints to monitor activities at identified locations and provide enforcement. These issues were ATV use in parks, tree cutting and removal, removal of driftwood from beaches, and overnight camping. A total of 102 patrols of parks were conducted by bylaw staff, with an additional patrols of 788 trail and park patrols conducted by CVRD animal control staff. An additional total of 130 man-hours was spent patrolling parks specifically to address public health orders related to COVID-19. Bylaw staff also provided weekend coverage to patrol busier parks during this time. That was over April and May of 2020. So for 2020, I've already touched on the MTIs. It was 33 total. There was 252 files opened in 2020, which was over 2019 when we had 210 files opened. Noise was the highest type of complaint we received in 2020 at 54 files total. Additionally, over 760 written correspondence was generated by bylaw staff and mailed out. 243 files were closed in 2020. 928 calls related to specific files were received. 843 calls for general questions were received, and 90 calls on COVID complaints. For animal control last year, our dog licenses, we sold 1,120 total, it's 100 down from 2019. Received 82 complaints of barking dogs, 26 complaints of aggressive dogs, and 142 complaints of dogs at large. So that's our year for 2020 in a snapshot, and I can absolutely answer any questions on that.
We'll give the director some time, but maybe while we're waiting, Amanda, the other section, what's that catch-all for?
So other, quite often is maybe something another agency has asked for assistance on. One that happened this year just recently that comes to mind was Ministry of Environment asked if bylaw staff could swing by a site and take some photographs on a potential spill. So once they go out and generate that, there's communication back and forth. For me, for tracking their time, we do open a file on that.
Great, thank you. I also wanted to ask about your, under your intergovernmental factors that, you're working quite closely with Macola Housing and some of these other agencies. Could you describe like exactly, I could understand the, Ministry of like Flinro and some of the other ministries, but I'm curious about that one in particular. How are you working together?
With Macola?
Yeah.
Macola owns multiple houses within the valley, including the regional district. So from time to time, we do have bylaw files on Macola Housing. We notify the Campbell River offices who we deal with, and if it's an unsightly, we had a dangerous dog last year at one. They're excellent. They're one of the better landowners to deal with when there is an issue. They tend to get those houses cleaned up quickly. If it's an issue with a tenant, they will enter an agreement with that tenant to stop the behavior. Maybe if it's the storing of garbage excessively or noise, that type of thing. The removal of the dog. We've had some great success working through some Macola files over the years.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions from the other directors. So on receipt then, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Moving on, I believe we have, sorry, I'm just going to come back to my agenda. The restructuring of regulatory services for receipt. Moved, and I can second, and back over to staff. I think Amanda's up again.
Okay, so this report is an update on the restructuring of existing Cvrd bylaw and regulatory services. It further describes the required steps and legislative process for the proposed restructuring of these services. Please note that the bylaws mentioned in this report are currently with the ministry being reviewed and will form part of the report when it is presented and moved through to board. They're missing on today's report. The proposed restructuring would result in a Denman Island and Hornby Island bylaw enforcement service and an Electoral Area A, Baines Sound only, Electoral Area B, and Electoral Area C bylaw enforcement service. This would not present any financial impact to residents. Specifically, staff are proposing to restructure existing bylaw services for Electoral Area A, B, and C bylaw enforcement service. What it would entail is expanding the purpose of the existing animal control service to include noise control, unsightly, and fireworks. Land use administration and zoning would stay with planning and would not be included in this restructure. The second new service would be a service forming Denman Island and Hornby Island bylaw enforcement, which would include expanding the purpose of the fireworks service to include noise control and unsightly premises. Amend the boundary to encompass only Denman Island and Hornby Island to form this new service. This proposal follows a similar initiative conducted in 2018 respecting local water services. For the merger of the services and repeal of the redundant service establishment bylaws, director consent is required from 2/3 of the participating jurisdictions, electoral areas A, B, and C, as well as approval by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. The financial benefits from combining existing bylaw services will include ease of administration of the bylaw service from a budget perspective, as well as accessibility to additional funds when required during legal action files and streamlined service delivery overall. Any of the reserve funds within the existing bylaw service will have to be individually expended before that service can be repealed and encompassed into a new service. The reserve fund balance for each function are listed in the staff report. Staff have reviewed options to expend the outstanding reserve balances for both noise control and unsightly premises. It was determined the use of these funds towards a bylaw vehicle would be mutually beneficial to both newly formed services. The existing bylaw vehicle is scheduled to be replaced in 2021 with the funds currently budgeted of function number 500 through planning services. Should the board authorize staff to proceed with the restructuring of regulatory services project as outlined in the staff report, and further authorize staff to utilize funds from the noise control and unsightly premises reserve funds totaling $72,548 to purchase a new bylaw vehicle. The 2021-2025 recommended financial plan will reflect the following. For function number 295 being noise control, 298 unsightly premises, a transfer from reserve funds to operating revenues in 2021 will occur. Animal control function 291, a recovery from other functions in 2021 in the amount of $72,548 to be contributed to the future expenditure reserve for the service also in 2021. This will ensure capital expenditures in 2021 for the purchase of a new bylaw vehicle in the amount of $72,548 to be funded by reserves. Function number 500, planning services, be a reduction in capital expenditures in 2021 by $30,000 for the replacement of our existing 2014 Nissan Rogue, with a corresponding reduction in transfers from the Capital Works Reserve number 850 for that service. This is a one-time expense for the purchase of the vehicle. Following this vehicle purchase, the next vehicle replacement would be scheduled for 2027 and be accommodated from function number 500 at that time. Despite this change presenting no notable financial impacts to residents, a communication plan attached as Appendix A to this report has been developed to ensure the public is informed of the proposed changes. The plan includes a website project page to support this initiative, as well as the use of social media and print advertising. The recommendations on this report are that the Comox Valley Regional District Board directs staff to proceed with the restructuring of regulatory services project as outlined in the staff report. And further that the Comox Valley Regional District Board support the use of $36,000 from the future expenditure reserve for function number 295 and $36,548 from the future expenditure reserve for function 298 towards the purchase of a new bylaw enforcement vehicle in 2021 and function number 291, which is animal control, with these transactions to be reflected in the 2021-2025 recommended financial plan. And finally, that the associated amendments to the service establishment bylaws be introduced and given first and second readings. That concludes the report, and I'm available for any questions.
Thanks, Amanda. And Director Arbor has a question.
Yeah, I stole the screen again.
That's all right.
Sorry, Chair. So yeah, I'm a Virgo, so more efficiency, things more tidy. I really love everything around the changes. I think it will streamline things, and just that's really happy to see that. Promised myself when I got elected that whenever there's a vehicle purchase happening, that you'll always hear the same song from me. So the Nissan Rogue, the Hyundai Kona, all electric, could probably satisfy the needs of the service. I would be quite willing to spend a little bit more money for us to continue to show leadership in EV. It may not satisfy all your requirements. I realize that perhaps, especially for animal control and things like that. But if we're able to have a look at it before buying another ICE vehicle, I would be quite pleased. Thank you.
I would second that. I don't see any other questions or comments. On receipt, is there anyone opposed? And that's carried. And Amanda did a really good job of outlining the three-part recommendation around proceeding with the restructuring, the movement of funds from future expenditures from number 295 and 298, and that the amendments to the service established bylaws be introduced and given first and second reading. Would someone like to make that move, Director Arbor? And I can second. Is there any discussion around that recommendation? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thanks, Amanda. Great. Next up, we are coming up to now Emergency Preparedness Fund application for the Emergency Support Services stream for receipt. Moved.
Second.
And seconded. and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Howie Siemens is online and will present this report and the recommendation proposed and answer any of your questions.
Great, thank you, Russell, and good morning to the chair, to the directors. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Great, thank you. So in front of us is a report we're looking for a resolution from the EASC and the board to support our grant application to UBCM's Community Emergency Preparedness Fund application. It is a requirement to support that application so that it actually can be processed for potential for opportunity of success. The application is to cover, it is under the Emergency Support Services stream of the Community Preparedness Fund initiative, and it is for $11,357.95. What we are looking to do is support our Emergency Support Services volunteer program, who directly support us in delivering services, immediate needs to those evacuated from small to large scale disasters, to be able to get IT equipment and required to deliver the Emergency Management BC's new evacuee registration assistance tools, which is an online based program that allows our volunteers to be able to stay where they are at their homes or in their office spaces and actually do online registration of evacuees virtually. It does take some higher level of IT equipment than they do have right now. So we will need those laptops and some printers to support them. It is also to provide some development of training to prepare them for the potential earthquake exercise. So we are going to be doing some development of training with that funding, as well as to build a reception center kit that will be supplied to Hornby Island. So they have actually a resource on site that doesn't have to be delivered from the main island. So that is in front of you for a request for a resolution to support the application today. And I'll take any questions.
Thanks. Director Harper?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in full support, and I love to see that there is no respite, you guys just keep plugging away at emergency services, and that's really appreciated. So fully in support of this request.
Thank you. Howie, I had a question around some of this IT equipment. You know, I'm assuming in times of an earthquake that some of our like Wi-Fi services, maybe communication service might be cut. Are we still able to do this registration if we don't have like internet?
Yes, chairs. We always will rely on paper format. That's our kind of our first deliverable. Even with us under COVID right now, the civic room has been planned out to be a small reception center to be able to do the paperwork with having enough spacing to allow that to happen. So we always will have paper fallback. Even within our emergency operations center, we always plan paper first, and while we have IT, that's the extra bonus. So
okay, thanks. So this is like a backup just in case.
Well, it's actually the evacuation tool is a new tool the province is implementing so that we could use more ESS members all through the province. So like when the fires, they had to send a lot of people down to our facilities to get registered. Our volunteers could actually do that on site and have them registered without coming down to the communities.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay.
I don't actually see any other questions. So on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried, and we have a recommendation. Moved.
Second.
And seconded. Any comments on the recommendation that we move forward with the application to UBCM? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thanks, Howie.
Great, thank you.
And moving on to the community halls restart grants for receipt. Moved, and I can second, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Doug DeMarzo will present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you through the Chair to Directors. This report is to seek support for financial aid funding to 5 community halls for approximately $25,000 out of the BC Safe Restart funding grant. It should be noted the allocation funding for community halls is consistent with board direction provided in 2020, if you recall your restart report. It's an attempt to invest in the long-term benefits to support community halls and provide that transition, not only for the current pandemic, but for future concerns as well. As such, we worked through the collaboration meetings with the community halls and identified a bunch of options that were available for them to basically submit requests to us. And of that, the 5 came through with mostly items of touchless nature to upgrade their community halls. It should be, there's about $60,000 remaining out of the original $723,000. And if this $25,000 was allotted, there'd be still about $35,000 for future consideration down the road. So we are getting to the end of our proportion of the $723 through the restart funding. You'll notice there's a table with a number of community halls, one being Fanny Bay Senior Society, the Hornby New Horizons grant is involved there, the Fanny Bay Community Association, Denman Island Rec Commission, and Black Creek Community Center, all looking for a portion of that expenditures. Any questions? I'm happy to take it this time.
I'm going to go over to Director Grieve first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the CEO to Doug DeMarzo. There's a lot of contention about the restart grants and how they were unevenly distributed between municipalities and regional districts. I'm just wondering if you could refresh my mind. We received, what do we have, about 24,000 people in our electoral areas. We received $723,000. Now I see the halls are going to get around 25,000 of that. I believe the fire department's got somewhere over 30 grand to distribute among them. Is that correct?
Approximately
and then
40,000.
Yeah. So outside of those 2 items, what from this money actually is going to stay in the electoral areas?
Madam Chair, I can answer the question, and that is the board has given us some initial allocation of the funds for us then to do the details and bring forward specific requests. This was one of them. You allocated, I think, about 100,000 or thereabouts available to community halls, and we're just bringing forward the practical application of those funds to specific projects that would qualify for them. We will be reporting back to the board on the complete use of the restart funds, because it may be that some of those initial allocations weren't fulfilled in whole, and there may be additional funding available. But that's information that we won't necessarily have for you today, but we will bring back to you at the next meeting.
Well, if I can rephrase that question, how much of this $723,000 has so far been allocated to projects outside electoral areas? I'm talking about the community foundation, talking about the aquatic center.
Madam Chair, we can bring back a report to the next EA committee just to show where the initial proposal was that was endorsed by the board and where those funds are at the time. So we commit to doing that at the next EA meeting.
Thank you.
And I will commit to holding the feet to the fire on how much money goes out of electoral areas and taxation and how much actually comes back. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. Glad that you're always on our toes for that. Director Arbour.
Yeah, thanks. I find that good, Dr. Grieve. Maybe this is not the right venue. I think we're having a very extensive lobby with the province as well in regards to the unfairness. And I think the message is actually being heard by the province. Not that there's another round of funding coming up, but I think they may have realized that their formula was a little bit broken. And I hear that some regional district, the inequity was way worse than ours, even though I agree with Dr. Grieve that the funding allocation, they should have followed Community Works funding formula, a proven formula, which I think is fair to everybody. And for some reason, they just picked the formula that totally skewed it to the municipalities. But we did vote Director Review and I, we did vote in favor of the initial budget for those funds. So I think that was our opportunity to make a stronger case perhaps internally. And in the end, I think we decided to take the high road of regional collaboration around the distribution of those funds. Back to the item at hand, I think that it's awesome. I'm so pleased to see that something for the community halls. And I'm glad that Doug spoke about how, that it sounds like there was a meeting with the community halls and everybody was given a chance to apply. I'm also hearing that if some of the halls initially did not send an application, maybe there could be flexibility if they want to pursue similar things. I see Union Bay is not on there and Hornby Hall, but I understand that they all had the opportunity to submit something. So that was my main question for today. And that's great. I think those halls are going to get busier. We're starting to vaccinate this week. So I think the whole relaunch, it's just, I really appreciate, first of all, staff holding those meetings with all of our facilities through the duration of the pandemic and showing support, and then also some funding. So thank you.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. Doug, just looking at the amounts that were requested from the different halls, I saw some very modest amounts from the Hornby Denman halls, but then quite a substantial one from Black Creek. Is there was there a major difference in what they were asking for? Like, is it 14,000 for one, but the rest were like in the 2,000 or even like $500 range?
Yeah, I think each hall individually assessed its current amenities in the hall, and I can speak to Black Creek. Their hall is a little larger and they have more washroom facilities, and I think they were the only ones to really look at doors as well. So looking at that type of option for powered doors. We did put the idea forward to all the halls, and we did go over a spreadsheet with them about cost. And I think, a lot of those halls are older and powered doors might not be what they were interested in at the time. So that's one of the reasons why Black Creek's a little bit higher.
Okay, thanks. I also noted that, I had a look at some of our grant and aid applications, and I saw a fairly substantial one from the Merville Hall there. And I'm wondering if it's possible for us to redirect any of their ask into this fund rather than having it come out of GIA. Would staff be able to look into that?
I think we'll look into that at that opportunity in April, and we discussed the rural community grants and understanding that there's still 35,000 left in this fund, and that'll be up to those conversations at that time. Kevin, kind of. Yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Director Grieve, do you have another question?
Just to, unless the board hasn't read it in the paper, heard about it already, the Black Creek also got almost $400,000 from the SURP grant. So they're very adept at writing for grants, whereas some of the other halls are more on a volunteer basis, and some of the board members of the society maybe lack some of the expertise in that area. So we have to address that, as you said, maybe some other way.
Okay, well, I think staff have maybe noted that. Any other questions regarding the Restart grants? Okay, hearing none. On receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. And we have a recommendation. Moved.
Second.
And seconded that $24,321.44 from the BC Safe Restart Grant funding be committed to distribution to the 5 community halls. Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. I see Mark here. Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll take a break so that people can stretch their legs. So we've got the Comox Valley Parks and Greenway Strategic Plan Progress Report.
Move report.
Moved and seconded with enthusiasm.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Mark Harrison will provide this progress report for you and answer any questions. There is a PowerPoint as well.
Thank you, Russell. To the Chair, I just wanted to bring forward the progress report on the rural Comox Valley Parks and Greenway Strategic Plan. This plan's purpose is really to outline a strategy for expanding parks and greenways within the Baines Sound Area A and Electoral Area B and Electoral Area C. So it doesn't include Denman Island or Hornby Island. And it's really to look at expansion for conservation, for recreation, and just general public enjoyment. It does establish a vision, it does establish goals and objectives. Those overarching goals are the following: to protect and connect native ecosystems over time, to connect people to nature, to link communities with greenways, to plan and manage parks in a proactive and responsive manner, to form partnerships to achieve common goals, and to obtain certainty of land tenure. It does also look at guidance on acquisition, looks at priorities for acquisition, funding mechanisms, and implementation strategies. So the focus of my report here is really on the implementation, the priority acquisitions, both active and reserve, and looking at implementation strategies. I can go to the next slide. So in terms of active acquisition priorities, where we're at, the plan does list 11 active park priorities. Those being the Western Toad Conservation Park and migration routes, One Spot Trail extensions, partnership for Williams Beach Forests, Seal Bay Forest, Garry Oak Ecosystem Conservation Area, Huntledge Triangle, Courtney River Estuary Wildlife Management Area, Royston Waterfront Trail, Royston to Cumberland Trail, Trent River Corridor, and the ENN. So of those 11, to date, we have completed 3 of those, and we have started in some fashion 5 others. So I think, you know, in terms of, we've got over 70% of those, the active, I think we should be on active, which is the one prior, yeah. 70% have been actioned. So I think that we're making good progress since we're at midterm through this plan. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of reserve, so these are basically the secondary acquisition priorities. So you know, parks is nebulous in some ways, and we need to be responsive and proactive. And oftentimes, or sometimes, we can't necessarily have the ability to action the active or the priority acquisition priorities. So there was a reserve list that was developed as well. So of those, there's 15. To date, we've completed 2, and we're actioning or have started 5 others. So I think, you know, 50% we're at action rate right now. So I think we're doing fairly well in that category as well. And next slide, please. So the plan also does identify 25 action items. These look at things like acquisition, but also looks at funding strategies, looks at partnership opportunities, looks at policies for park management, stewardship, and looks at mechanisms to report back to the board, which is one of these mechanisms is this progress report. So to date, we've completed 11 of those, and we're actioning or starting 9 others. So I think we've got a pretty strong performance on the action items as per the implementation strategy. Final slide, please. So this is a little bit hard to read. This is the map that was in your Appendix A. But what I just wanted this to just show or to highlight is kind of where we're at geographically. So if you look at the map, everything in purple is what we've kind of completed as per the plan. The green is active priority that is to be completed, and the brown is a reserve priority to be completed. And I think what's interesting about this is that we do see a fairly, you know, fairly regional, it's equitable regionally. I think we've got some action items throughout the whole region, so it's good to see. So on that, I'm happy to take any questions.
And Director Roberts got his finger on the trigger.
Oh, I'm on already. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, super excited to see that. I think a year ago we were discussing that we're at about the halfway mark with the park strategy. And as you say, it was due for an update. For members of the general public, I may ask you to clarify the difference between a park and a reserve, because I think for a lot of people that might, including myself, may ask what is the fundamental distinctions. I did read the plan, so I kind of know, but I think it's good to say it publicly so people understand why we have those two different types of categories. And the second is, yeah, I think I agree with you. There's been some really good progress. I see on the map that, yeah, it's a very ambitious swath of land around the Trent River corridor that was initially identified. So I'll definitely be looking forward to hear more about some of the strategies we're employing. I know that it's surrounded by woodlots, and eventually to the south will be likely Comox First Nation land. So to me, that's very near the top of the list in terms of Area A. And then my second question is, as we're doing this review, there is one that is not in the plan whatsoever. And I want to bring it also right up to the top of the list. And I hope that both staff and elected officials will agree. As you guys know, we are going through the Union Bay Improvement District transition. Thank you. And I think it's been a long time identified priority in the community of Union Bay, the protection of the watershed around Langley Lake, which will now actually be under our jurisdictions. And we know that Washer Creek is likely coming online. So I'm surprised to not see it in the Parks Reserve lands, because I think those are a bit like the Comox Lake watershed, critical amenities, both from a essential service perspective, but also in the future, I think from a potential recreation and otherwise service. So my two questions, one is refresh us on the reserve and parks, and second, how do we go about considering initiatives that are not in the plan? Thank you.
To the chair, thank you for that question, Director Arbor. The active priorities are the principal priorities that are governing the plan in terms of acquisition strategies, whereas the reserve are the secondary priorities. And the Parks Department really needs to be responsive, and at times there might be opportunities that will arise. And if so, one of those opportunities kind of arises within the reserve portion, then we try to action those. But principally what we're trying to action is those within the active priorities. So hopefully that helps clarify that. In terms of the Langley, there is the ability within the plan. There is a criteria to assess parkland when it's not actually listed as a reserve or active priority. So we do have a criteria there, and that's in one of the schedules within this document, which allows us to assess other potential parkland as it comes up. I think that there is also the ability, as we move into a more formal process, which we're supposed to do at midway through the plan, to look at what are these priorities? Are these priorities still working for people? And are there other things that are maybe potentially missed? So, Langley Lake could come up with that, and that could be maybe rejigged as a reserve priority. So hopefully that answers those questions.
I think Director Arbor has a follow-up.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that one. I'm glad to hear that could be considered. Just last year, again, there was a huge amount of fear of the logging companies logging in the Langley Lake watershed, and it's, when I looked at it, it's a very small watershed in the scheme of things. The catchment basin for Langley Lake is about 1,000 acres. So I think there's a myriad of tools that could be looked at in order to provide better protection. And I think I would definitely be supportive of us considering that watershed as a whole in the future, but also realizing that the Trent River hasn't moved so much, and I would love to see that one too. So anyways, that's my thoughts from Area A.
Thanks. And I'm going to go over to Area C now. Director Grieve.
Yeah, to heck with Area A. Put all your money in Area C. Seriously though, folks, this is one of the few things we can do as electoral area directors that is totally within our purview. I think there was a little bit of a pushback initially when we brought in the parcel tax, but that's all quieted down now, and you can see the results. My question is around something we brought up before. this may be the place to bring it up, but you know, we've got two funding sources here, or three funding sources. We got our DCCs, park dedication money. We've got our parcel tax, which brings in almost 200,000. Then we have our actual taxation. Now, I think the question I asked before was, you know, what qualifies for community works funds and what doesn't. Obviously, you can hardly ever get grants to actually purchase parkland, but operations and capital, I believe you can. So, you know, we're faced with an issue right now with huge rising costs in real estate. I mean, it's phenomenal out there. So our ability to actually purchase property right now is severely curtailed. But I'm just wondering, on some level, are we? And I asked this before. I think Mariah answered it sort of vaguely, but we are able then to channel community works funds into the operation and capital of parks, correct?
Through the chair to the Director Grieve. So with respect to community works funds, we cannot use those funds to purchase land. That's specifically noted as an ineligible activity. With respect to anything considered recreational infrastructure, we can use those funds to support that. However, community works funds are largely a capital infrastructure related program. And as such, I do not believe transferring dollars to support ongoing operational costs would be permitted.
But if we talk about a capital upgrade, AKA a new parking lot at Seal Bay, that might be something we could look into, correct?
That I believe would be eligible, correct.
Which would free up some dollars for the other side of the coin. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Director Grieve. And I think I'm actually going to pick up a little bit on your comment on land prices. So I'm wondering if staff can comment about the issue. I mean, you've got kind of two sort of streams of work. You've got the acquisition side and then the actual bringing online through trails and whatever amenities. You know, I'm seeing so much demand in Seal Bay and Nymph Falls, all of our big regional parks. The amount of people that are using them now because of COVID. And I'm wondering if staff can comment on like just where to best put your energy now, whether it be on acquisition in light of the fact that we're also discussing about a regional park plan, like a regional service, whether concentrating more on bringing the properties we have online, which I know is not going to please Director Arbor, because I saw some of those Area A properties haven't been purchased yet, but to put more emphasis on the trails and the actual accessing versus the purchasing?
To the chair, thanks for that question. I honestly feel that those are two separate issues, but I think that the Parks Department can take both those on at the same time and can kind of juggle those priorities as they kind of come forward. Just working on acquisitions and working on making the parks kind of more appropriate for users. They both take time and they both take effort. And there's usually a lot of kind of back and forth on all those. So I think that they can be achieved at the same time. I do think that, just for us, the electoral areas, we are definitely hindered in terms of the amount of funds that we have to actually acquire land. And I think the regional park service is the way that we can kind of move forward on those. I do want to stress that what the Parks Department is trying to do now is try to focus our efforts on our kind of larger parks and try to get those kind of more up to speed to meet kind of user demand. But things like upgrading Bates Road, I mean, that takes time. There's planning and there's permitting and there's a whole bunch of other issues that need to happen to make those a reality. So, I'd love to just turn the switch and make the parks a bit larger and more user friendly, but it does take time.
Great, thanks. I see Director Harper has a question.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad by staff's response that I think we have to try to do it all. It's an important service. It's a very appreciated service in our communities, as we know. I am hopeful there will be some good discussion around a regional park, but we also, I think, need to think about moving forward with or without it. As you guys know, in the Royston Union Bay area, there's going to be a ton of development. And if we don't have the foresight to plan and secure those green spaces now, it may never happen. And so, so those are multi-year projects, but I don't want them to fall into the inactive category. I think we need to keep an eye and get creative on how we support those efforts.
Great. We've spurred another question from Director Grieve.
Well, just a thought, put the turnstile up there, and if you're from the municipalities, you have to pop a toonie in. No, seriously, again, I do think that it begs mentioning the fact that our park staff and the volunteers that we have, I understand we have at least 90 volunteers in different capacities, maintaining and helping with the Parks Department. I just think that we owe them a huge debt of gratitude for the amount of work they've done, especially during COVID. And it's certainly appreciated by the greater community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Great comment. Seeing no other questions on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Okay, we'll have about a 12-minute just break, stretch legs, grab a cup of coffee, be back at 12. Is that okay? Yeah.
managed to get through a park thing without talking about Stoner Falls. That was really impressive.
Ready to go? Okay. As folks just finish up, I think I'll call the meeting to order. Keep on chewing. We're gonna move on now to item number 10 in the agenda, the 2020 Community Resiliency Investment Fund Program Project Review for receipt.
Move 10.
Moved, and I'll second it, and over to Sal.
Thank you very much. And James Bast is here to present the report and answer any of your questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Through the CAO and the chair to the committee. At the October 6th board meeting, I provided a quick update of the 2020 CRI grant application, where I had described how we pivoted funds to be able to more fully utilize the grant application or the grant funds. Following that, we've since completed some major steps within that CRI grant program. First, for example, we developed educational signage to reduce the human-caused wildfires. So signage is up and is now available. The training of staff, both the volunteer fire service staff as well as KFN staff have received training through this grant application. And we were able to encourage residents to fire smart their properties by way of a chipper program with the removal of fuel debris from yards by way of chipper, as opposed to burning it on site or leaving it to be a fuel. So the curbside pickup of fuel debris by chipper was successful in that through 485 properties, we were able to remove approximately 65 tons of wood chips. That's about 270 pounds per lot, which is a substantial amount. All this in the context of, because of the pivot, we did it at the most inopportune time. Most folks had already done their yard waste removal and cleanup earlier in the year. And but it gave us a modicum of data that allows us to see future application for this grant. The other aspect of this is that the removal of the yard waste debris and chipper program, it supports the fire smart goals and the fire service goals of fire safety and reduction of the risk of wildfire. But it also has possibly the added benefit of improved air quality, as 65 tons of debris was not burned in this particular instance. So if I can just quickly recap the chipper program. The curbside yard waste was delivered pretty much as a pilot project as we pivoted the funds. We ran the operational aspect of it through 5 different jurisdictions. That is, we did the Black Creek Oyster Bay area, and we did Fanny Bay, Denman Island Fire Protection Service area, as well as Hornby Island Fire Protection Service area, and Comox First Nations land within the Comox Valley. The program included that each department and KFN directly promoted fire smart principles through flyers, through social media, door knocking, and so on. That information was provided to the public, and it was good to have the connection with the homeowners and the opportunity to teach some of the fire smart principles. The selected contractor then moved through the neighborhoods with the chipper equipment, going driveway to driveway and picking up the material that was at the end of the driveway. Another aspect to this is that the chips that were created were delivered to the Cumberland composting site, as well as on Hornby Island, and particularly the Cumberland site. Those chips will now be part of the process that manifests in Skyrocket. So there's another aspect to review. Now the program was delivered, like I said, in November, and that was the most inopportune time to do it, but that was what we had. And we were still able to come up with that volume. The fire chiefs and KFN staff have indicated following the event, I'd sent out a questionnaire and asked if they felt that it was a good project or a good program. And they all indicated that the residents truly appreciated the program, the participating residents. And they looked at it as an alternative to backyard burning. Anyway, the 2021 grant application has been approved, and staff is again working to move forward with a chipper program through the fire departments, with the focus being on fire smart and resiliency to wildfire. And with that, I'm available for any questions that the directors may have.
Director Arbor, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. And I can confirm on it was really well received in my community, and I think on other communities as well. I didn't have my little pile of branches ready on time for it, but coincidentally, yesterday I spent 3 hours on the chipper and feeding a chipper. We were doing some tree work at our place. The value of the program is tremendous, and my main question is, a program like that to me should be probably a permanent program. I don't like to see it grant dependent. So is there some consideration by the ASC in the future and by our staff as to whether the province would help us make this permanent, or what options? Because it's the kind of thing that I would hate for us to see one year that you get the communities in the habit of doing things. It's a bit like the discussion we had around the rebates for heat pumps and such, right? You want to have consistency and not, oh, we didn't get the grant this year and now the chipper program is out. So I'm wondering if there's any thoughts given about the sustainability of this type of service to the community, realizing the multiple benefits arising. If we were in Nanaimo and we use the language of the day, we'd say, hey, this is circular economy stuff. It hits all the marks, right, with this program. So I just wonder if staff has any ideas around the future sustainability of this activity.
If I may, the current iteration of the program is, like you said, based on grant funding, and with the fire service focus being the fire safety aspect of it. Having said that, I have had discussions with staff and provided information, and this information, as well as this report, is being forwarded to, or has been forwarded to, the air quality coordinator. This report and the data that's received from this may manifest itself in recommendations at some point with regards to a long-term viability.
I'm going to second Director Arbor's comment. I'm really enjoying and love hearing about this, but I'm going to go over to Director Grieve first for his question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to surprise everybody by saying I totally support this initiative. I think that everybody knows that open burning creates far more particulates than wood stoves, especially the high efficiency modern ones. So I think this is a step in the right direction. I'm all in favor of finding some service we can house it under more permanently, I think it hits all the marks, as Director Arbor said. So hopefully we can make it a habit, and certain times of the year, when everybody has all the trees dropping their branches like it has over the last couple of windstorms, you got some place to take it without having to go all the way to Cumberland. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. I had a couple of questions, James. I see that we have, like, at least on Hornby and was it Denman as well, that some of the chips were able to stay on the island. Because I know in some other communities, they really object to having the chips moved off island. It's if there's a composting project or something that can keep, chips are a very, very valuable asset in land, especially farming. And so with our programs that are not on the islands, is there an opportunity for some of those chips to also go elsewhere, or is there a greater need at Skyrocket?
In the context, if I may, through the CAO to the chair and the committee, in the context of the CRI grant, the guide, program guide is quite specific in that the chips need to be removed from the property of origin, and they cannot become more fuel to increase the risk of wildfire. Now, having said that, the composting aspect of it is one aspect of it, composting within an approved facility, if you will. Staff is currently in discussions with UBCM and waiting an answer, UBCM being the grant administrator, as to the viability of utilizing the chips on an agricultural property, where they would be again composted and become part of the duff, the medium that is soil. And we're just awaiting that response from UBCM now.
Great. I'm sure there's many farmland owners who would be very interested in that as a way of kind of kickstarting their own getting into active composting as well. My just last question was around for the 2021 project. I'm assuming you're not going to be returning to the same neighborhoods again to do the chipping program, or are you? Are you moving into other areas?
One of the aspects of the delivery of the service in 2020 was that the door knocking was within the Fanny Bay, Hornby Island, and Denman Island was complete. The full service area was invited, and because of the timing, the participation level was not as optimum. Within the Oyster River area, we utilized the very high density areas in that those are the areas that are more likely to have a catastrophic wildfire. And so that's where the focus was. We'll see as the 2021 grant unfolds and contractors submit quotes for their services. I'll be working with each of the fire chiefs to determine the participation aspect and size. Again, it'll be based on fire safety and that aspect of it.
I'm wondering if, the air quality aspect of this could also be brought into consideration. As in Area B, I know Croto Beach and the Huban Virginia Drive area, from an air quality point of view, when it's backyard burning season, gets very, very bad because of the density of the housing in those areas. Would those two areas be ever under consideration?
Croto Beach. Do you know the service area?
That would be
I'll just speak to that. That's protected by the Comox Fire District. So right now we're primarily based with our fire chiefs in their rural protection districts is what this program works through.
Okay. And is Comox applying at all? Does anyone know?
They're aware of the program. I don't know if they've applied.
No, this being the pilot project, it's very limited in grant funds. And so what we're doing is utilizing our fire services as the operational delivery of the service. We have Croto Beach is within Comox. Then the town of Comox may have that opportunity to do it as well. I don't know if they've applied at all.
Okay. All right, thanks. And I know Huban Bay Beach is also under Comox protection too. So, okay, we'll have to go knocking on that door and see what they can do for us. I don't see any other questions. So on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thanks.
Thank you.
Moving on, the rural roadside collection electoral assent process for receipt. Moved
Second.
and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Jake Martins is here and will describe this report and answer any of your questions.
Thanks. Over to you, Jake.
Thank you, Russell. And through the chair, I'm pleased to present this report that's seeking the committee's early confirmation of the method for participating area approval with respect to the roadside garbage and recycling collection service. So over the last several months, the EASC has received a few informational reports on this matter, providing the results of the phase 1 engagement that was undertaken and detailing the planned phase 2 public engagement. Following receipt of the latter report, staff identified the desire to include the proposed participating area approval method in the second phase of engagement so that we can ensure the public is informed and aware of what's likely to come. And in this regard, staff have considered the two available options for approval, that being the alternative approval process and the assent vote, or otherwise known as a referendum. The attached report details the basics of each of those processes, and staff have supplemented this with a consideration of 7 key themes, which are kind of identified as local government best practices when I'm making such a decision. Chief among these would be the project history, in which a referendum was conducted in 2013 and was rejected, with 73% of those opposing the initiative. Counterbalancing this is the public feedback that we did receive as part of the last phase of engagement, in which over 3,000 residents participated, and we received support ranging from 63 to 83% in favor. So a strong opinion in that regard. These results likely indicate that there has been a significant change in public opinion since that last referendum was conducted, and this, combined with the cost savings, the service function, and the enhanced accessibility, have led staff to recommend the use of an AAP for this initiative. Unfortunately, if supported, this AAP would fall outside of our unified AAP process, which is scheduled to occur this spring. However, given the strategic value of this project and initiative, it would be conducted nonetheless this year within the fall, pending any further reports on the phase 2 engagement. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. Based on the level of support through our phase 1 consultation, I'm definitely in favor of going to an AAP. But I actually had a constituent call me last week and saying, what is happening with the recycling and garbage effort? Because the last time they heard was last summer when we communicated back the result, and he shared some impatience around how long it's taking us to do the rest of the analysis, and assured him that there was definitely work to do. This said, I know probably staff won't like to hear that, but is there any way that we could wrap it into the single unified AAP schedule for June? Because I think it would fit there. I'm also concerned about other initiatives coming down the pipe later down the road that will require potentially some electoral engagement. And if there's any way to put it in there, I think that would be a great benefit to reduce the amount of demand and that we place on our residents in terms of their consideration. Thanks.
Thanks through the chair. So yeah, staff certainly have sensed the urgency from the response from the public and otherwise around getting the service process in place as soon as possible. As you're aware, the board has given 3 readings and sent to the inspector the other bylaws respecting the service initiatives that will be run through the unified AAP process. Timing would be extremely difficult, I would say, and we'd be relying on the inspector to approve those, give 3 readings and then receive inspector approval in far advance of what normally we receive that response from. So I'd be reluctant to commit us to the possibility of that. However, certainly we can investigate that further if there's a strong desire.
I think James has a follow-up.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, just further to Jake's comments, the in the phase 2 of the engagement, we're really trying to share information and communicate about some of the different factors of what the eventual service will consider, and so that effort I think will really help to inform the public in terms of what the service is that they can expect when we do go to the AAP. We want to ensure, or the electoral approval, I should say, we want to ensure that there's really clear understanding amongst the public, and that we understand what other issues may still come up from the public, so that we can have that conversation before heading into an electoral approval process. And so the phase 2 engagement will provide for that time.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up, or you're good? Well, yes, and I too am also hearing a lot of impatience in the community. There's, I think people are very differently to the last referendum on this topic. What I think actually might hurt us is just delaying longer. The time it's taking is actually what's creating some of the negative feedback in the community. So I see staff nodding, so I know that you're hearing that. I would agree if there is any way, if the Inspector General, if we get some kind of return back, I would also love to see this sooner than later. Yeah. Director Grieve has a question.
Actually, no, more of a comment. I totally support bringing this forward sooner than later. I think by dithering, you're actually working contrary to purposes. So I would definitely agree that we should move this ahead, expedite the AAP.
Okay, I think staff have heard us. I don't see any other comments on receipt. So I'll call the question on receipt. Is anyone opposed? And that is carried. And then we have a recommendation.
Move it.
Moved. And Director Arbor just wants to double check the wording. I'm wondering if the wording, if it ties into just our recent discussion, if there's any way to maybe adjust it.
If I may, Madam Chair, so I think the language of the recommendation speaks to following phase 2 engagement, and I certainly I can't speak for the communications department, but I sense that through internal staff discussions, maybe there's a potential there that we can look to expedite some of that engagement, as James spoke to try and bring this forward as quickly as possible.
Okay, so it's the motion's been seconded, and Director Arbor's going to speak to it.
Yeah, I think all three elected officials have a similar view, but I also want to take note of James' comments around making sure that people really understand what the service is as well, some of the costs, because we had some really rough estimates in phase 1. But if that stuff is now available, so I'm gonna leave it in the hands of staff. If there's a way to do an expedited phase 2 and then squeeze it as part of a single approval, and I understand we need to understand probably procurement and there's other consideration. I mean, it's a big topic, but if there's that, I think that it'd be worthwhile, if it's doable, to do it in June rather than wait until September and October. Yeah, that'd be my thoughts. Otherwise, I won't hold it against staff. If it's just not there, it's not there.
Yeah. Wondering too if there's any ability to do some things concurrently, like to not have them be one after, if the communications can happen while we're also looking at procurement and adjusting, if that's at all possible. James, you have a comment?
Sure, thanks. I think the recommendation as it stands, certainly, as Jake said, would send us through the phase 2 engagement and then come back to the AAP, and beginning of July is what we were contemplating for a timeline. and having heard the directors very clearly, you know, we'll look at the singular approach and just understand whether whether any of those risks can be mitigated.
Okay.
And I think there is, I want to say just barely enough time if we do go down that road, but I wouldn't want you to hold your breath that that's the result that we would come away with, given the plans that and the considerations that we've already put into this process. And then to Chair Hamir, the yes, there's parallel work going on in terms of the procurement and some of the other aspects that are less related to the engagement itself. So we're very aware of the timing and concern for moving this along quickly, and it's our intent to do that as well.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions, and we have the recommendation that's been moved and seconded. Is there anyone opposed? And that is carried. Thanks to staff for hearing that. Next up on the agenda, we have the Community Works Funds report for February 28, 2021 for receipt.
Move 12.
Moved and seconded. And over to staff.
Thank you very much. And I'll ask Kevin Duval to provide a summary and answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to the directors, good afternoon. So what is in front of you today is the quarterly Community Works Fund report for your information. We do apologize for the delay. However, we wanted to make sure to support the director's additional information that we included, kind of the allocations that have been made during the 2021-2025 financial planning process, so that you got a more robust look at the amounts of funding that are currently remaining, as we are now entering the final 3 years of the current 10-year agreement for the Community Works Funds program. So as we note in the staff report, the CVRD receives about $1 million annually through UBCM from the federal gas tax agreement to support the various initiatives that have been supported over the past number of years. These funds are then allocated through to the electoral areas on a population or a per capita basis. This is consistent with how the federal tax agreement does fund all of the participating local governments. That is done on a per capita basis with a funding floor formula. So again, we consistently follow that approach, as do most of the regional districts and local governments that receive this funding. As we note in there, at the end of December 31st, 2020, the balance of Community Works funds was $8 million, with $3.6 million committed to pending projects and approximately $4.4 million in uncommitted dollars. Over the course of the financial planning process that we are just nearing completion through now, we have identified 13 additional projects totaling $2.95 million, which would then leave about $1.45 million in uncommitted funds being available to the end of March. Because it's important to remember that we should then be receiving very shortly our first of 2 allocations for 2021-2022 through UBCM. What this then means is that, through to the end of the program, with the Community Works Funds, commitments made through the financial planning process, that we'd be looking at a total of about $4.7 million remaining to be uncommitted over the next 3 years. And the breakdown per electoral area is provided in Appendix A for your information. So perhaps I'll leave it there and certainly welcome any questions.
Thank you. And Director Arbor has a question.
Thank you for the report. It's one of my favorite topics, the Community Works Funds. And thank you also for the explanation that the per capita allocation is actually federally mandated. I had a question about that, and it's good to confirm it's not an internal policy of the CVRD. I'd like to point out that this is way fairer than what we were discussing around the restart. So per capita, think about the impact of that. It means that the 25,000 people will get more money than the 15,000 of Comox.
The other way around.
Yeah, it's the other way around, right? And per capita. But one of my questions was, I was looking at Denman and Hornby, and I was thinking, it's funny that all of our services well, not all, most of our services tend to be funded per assessment. And I was going to actually, if it was an internal policy of the CVRD, I was going to advocate for us to look at that for the next 2024, if there's a renewal of the thing to, because for Denman and Hornby, the assessment, they would get quite a bit more money if it was based on assessment rather than per capita. And considering that most of our services are per assessment rather than capita, I think it would be a potentially a valid argument, but it's not the case because it's federally mandated. So end of that that remark. Yeah, I'm running on fumes partly on Denman and Hornby. I think we've done a good job of identifying projects and we won't have any problems getting to the end of the term. I think there is, I'll have to go back to my notes. I was glad to see the Royston water conversion. There's a big tentative beside there on the 500,000. But I thought in our discussion regarding the Cross Denman Island Trail that the 180,000 was also potentially tentative based on comments I'd made to be willing to part with those monies if there was associated grants and leverage from active transportation or otherwise to the project. So anyways, maybe something that I'll look after this meeting. I had not noticed it in advance. And for Area A, yeah, for Bainstown, I guess a lot of it will probably go towards water/sewage, whichever comes up. And I'll pass it over to Area B and Area C because you guys have quite a bit of money left over. Thanks.
Director Grieve, do you have any comments on how you're going to spend your money?
Well, I'm just looking to get some money back from Area A eventually for the money I put up for the original
saying
sewer
sorry.
proposition.
His pockets are empty.
Well, maybe I'll have to come and knock on Area C's door, but no, this does looks a lot better. I agree with Daniel that at least the money's staying in the electoral areas to a great degree. But I would say that we have to be very cautious, and to use a phrase that's used by the Accessibility Association, nothing about us without us, because too often in the past I see that we are kind of the money mark of the regional district when they have to go and get quick money. That, you know, we need an extra $1.5 million to finish up the building, or whether we need another $300,000 to build the approaches to a Department of Highways bridge across the Solon River. You go to the electoral area directors. And in both those instances, the actual facility are squarely inside the municipality. So I think we got to make sure that we spend this money diligently, that we use it to its best advantage. I'm happy to see that the Nymph Falls parking lot is mentioned there. And I think that the Seal Bay could be another one. And save our powder for the really big issues we need. Which some we haven't even seen yet. The unknown unknowns, I guess. I think Daniel's got the biggest on his plate right now. We don't know how that's all going to work out, but it's enormous. So in Area C, I see we've got about $450K for a water metering for the Watuco system, which may or may not become part of the Comox Valley, or at least the under the auspices of the Comox Valley with the Black Creek Oyster Bay Service Committee. So, you know, it's a matter of making sure that we're well informed, and we've got a lot of prior consultation before decisions are made about our money. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. Kevin, did you have any comments?
I was just going to provide some info for clarification. So with respect to the way the funding is distributed, so again, we receive the funding based on a per capita basis as part of the federal gas tax agreement. And like, as I had mentioned, that we then consistently apply that same allocation. It is not a mandate per se. There's nowhere in the federal agreement that stipulates we have to do it in that manner. It's just a consistent practice. It's a practice that, as far as I'm aware, most other jurisdictions also follow, just to keep kind of the consistency of the approach intact.
Great, thank you for that. I just wanted to point out that, oh, sorry.
Madam Chair, Director Arbor is looking perplexed, and I just asked if Kevin would qualify this because that was my recollection.
Okay, all right, yes.
The federal government allocates the monies based on a per capita basis. Once it arrives at the regional district, it's up to the regional district to determine its allocation of those funds. This regional district happens to allocate it to the electoral areas, but as you can see, Director Grieve has allocated some of his monies to that can be done.
Yeah.
And you can spend this on services that you provide to the municipalities as well.
Hmm.
That's not mandated by the federal government. Those are decisions made by this regional district.
Okay, it looks like Director Arbor has a follow-up.
Thank you for looping back on it. That clarifies, because then I thought we were tied to the per capita formula. Well, as our CEO told me earlier, we have a lot on the go, so I won't put that on deck. But I think for the next agreement, if we're still in office, some of the directors and myself, and maybe for the next agreement for 2024, we could cue a conversation around whether we're the pros and cons of the internal policy we've adopted. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Arbor. Sorry, what I was going to point out too is not only do we do a lot of capital works funding through this, that we do have some planning as well that happens around the agricultural watershed planning. And I just had a question because I noticed the under commitments, the Comox Valley Sustainability Strategies implementation phase. And I wasn't actually sure what that was referring to. Do staff know what project that is, or?
Do you know offhand, Kevin?
I'll do my best because this was certainly well before my time. So through the chair. So there was a number of initiatives that were identified, I believe it was back in about 2010, that kind of fell into kind of a general umbrella of sustainability strategy. So we have been slowly expending those monies through various services. I believe things like a bike and ride program. So that was one of the items that was originally identified in that has recently been shifted over to the transit service to expend the remaining, I believe it's about $3,000 or $4,000 that is left to unspend in that. So there's, just some limited dollars left available under those motions that were made some time ago.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'll also point out that I don't have a ton of committed dollars, and that there is some nice wiggle room for Area B. And as Director Grieve said, we don't know what we don't know that's coming down the pipe. I am very interested in some of the results that obviously the Food Hub consultants have. So I'm wondering if staff could comment on the appropriateness of using these types of dollars for example, agricultural planning or, any kind of infrastructure that something like that, the Hub report might highlight.
Do you want us to put our minds to that when those things come forward in the reports? Or
I think
answer the
so.
question
Yeah.
now?
No. I think you can wait till any recommendations come forward in the report. But so I just wanted to kind of signal that I'd be open to that coming out of Area B because we do have such a big agricultural base in Area B. I think it would be highly beneficial for residents there. So yeah, I will leave it at that. It's just a comment. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Now moving on to Black Creek Oyster Bay Services Committee Financial Planning Policy. For receipt moved.
Second.
And seconded, and over to staff.
And I'll look to Doug DeMarzo maybe to comment on this. It's with respect to fire services and the Merville and Mount Washington.
It's number 13.
Yeah. Thank you. Essentially, this is the overview of the policy framework for the financial planning process and decision-making. It looks at the guiding principles of the Black Creek Fire Department and Oyster Bay Water Services.
It was referred to us by BCOB, I guess, for comments. Director Grieve, did you want to sort of elucidate anything that you felt we should know at this board or at this committee? Sorry.
I think I can comment in that the policy sets out how budgets will be developed and how those costs will be allocated to both Merville and Mount Washington. And the Merville Hall the Merville service does apply to Area B as well as Area C. Director Grieve is a representative on the BCOB, can represent his area for those, but we thought it would be beneficial to bring it to the EA directors to bring it to their attention on a regular basis as these budgets are developed. So that's the key aspect to this, that you will be referred to these matters so you can see how the funds are allocated to those two services, which the Black Creek Oyster Bay Department provides.
Great, thank you for that.
Well, that still brings me to the fact that we have a few irons in the fire right now, and especially concerning the Merville Fire Department once it opens up. As you say, it spans both Area B and Area C, and there's a possibility maybe we can even get the Bates Beach area in on that over time. The Mount Washington one is a little more complicated. I was hoping to get it on the omnibus approval AAP coming up, but unfortunately they haven't got drilled down far enough yet to be able to bring it forward to the residents up there. I don't know what else to say. We've got shared services with Area D, and of course anybody who has tuned into the Black Creek Oyster Bay Services Committee meeting realizes there's a real challenge when you only have two directors on one service, that you need unanimous decisions on everything, which isn't always the easiest thing to get. But this is just for information. There's no recommendation attached to it. But it's an interesting hybrid that we got going forward. And we are talking about in the north part anyway, it is a settlement expansion, or a growth node, I should say, under the RGS. So that we are anticipating some growth in that area.
Great. Thank
So
you, Director.
watch this space.
Okay. And Director Arbor has a comment or question.
Yeah, thanks. If we're going to receive referrals, we might as well weigh in a little bit, but tying to the previous item, it seems like there's also a lot happening with that service, with the Wetitco integration with the BCOB, the well project, the fire halls, all these different things. And I just have a question, because I know that Area C does have a lot of community works funds available for the next 2 or 3 years. So is the director and staff maximizing their opportunity to step into those funds to support some of those capital projects?
I look to staff.
Oh, and Director Greaves looking at staff.
There are a number of projects where community works funds are being allocated. Director Grieve mentioned earlier the potential if Wetitco folds in the use of monies for water meters. There's also a project where we looked at Strathcona also contributing to contribute their share of any improvements to the Black Creek Oyster Bay water system too.
They have in the past.
All right, thank you. And I thank you actually for the referral, so that sometimes when we lose track of what's happening at BCOB, it's always a good reminder for us. I don't see any other comments. And so on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Item number 14, the 2021-2025 proposed financial plan budget presentation for receipt. Moved. And I can second, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. I'll just ask Kevin DeVille to give a bit of an overview, and then we'll present to you a number of the more modest budgets that we have for the electoral areas.
Thanks.
Okay, once again, thank you very much through the chair to the directors. So yes, we are in kind of the home stretch to the current financial planning process. So what is in front of you today is for smaller service type budgets for your consideration. And then tomorrow we have the Comox Valley Sewage Service budget going forward to the Sewage Commission. And then the last one later on this week will be the final opportunity for the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board to review the recommended budget for that service. We will then be rolling everything up into the annual budget bylaw, and that will be coming forward to the board for first, second, and third reading next Tuesday afternoon, with final reading slated to take place on March the 30th. So as you can see on the dashboard there, we're getting very close to this public consultation rollout phase of the financial planning. And then, like I say, we'll be undertaking the remaining of the work towards March 31st, and then kind of getting everything kind of tidied up so that we can have the adopted budget kind of presented and out the door probably the second, third week of April.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Kevin? Okay, hearing none on receipt. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. So we'll move on to the first of those functions to look at. Comfort Stations, function 686, report for receipt. Moved,
Second.
seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you, and Doug DeMarzo will present this one.
Thank you. This is Comfort Station 686. And as you recall, we're asked to come back to the ASC to look at phasing out this service in a more quick fashion. As such, we are moving along with the financial plan now reflecting phasing out by the end of 2021. Part of this would be a contribution of $35,000 to the Electoral Parks and Greenway service to support site design, purchase installation and landscaping around Bates Road, Seal Bay Park, and potentially Nymph Falls Park. And with the reserves remaining, there's still another $35,000 or so remaining, and we're looking at offering this to local nonprofit organizations with community halls as a priority if they have any valuable outdoor or washroom spaces needed as a public washroom facility on their sites. So we'll be going through this process this year and hoping to wind down this service. Mark's also here for any questions, if you have any questions regarding this service.
Director Harbour?
Thanks, that's awesome. You guys turn around on a dime on that one, and I think everything that you described to use some of those dollars make really good sense. Don't forget the comfort station at Langley Lake. Thanks.
I don't see any other questions, so I'll call the question on receipt. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried, and we have a recommendation. Moved, and I can, and seconded. Comments or questions on the recommendation? Hearing none, that is approved. The street lighting service function 710 to 750 for receipt. Moved. And I think that was seconded, or I can second that, and over to staff.
Thank you, and Mike Zabarski is here to present the street lighting service function budgets.
Everybody's here today.
Yes, thanks, Russell. Through the chair of the committee, quick presentation here on the street lighting service areas. I was going to do 11 separate presentations, each 5 slides, but I decided to put them all into one.
We appreciate that.
So, do I have the clicker, Kevin, or is that? Can I steal that from you? So the CVRD manages 11 service areas currently. We have Union Bay Improvement District coming our way soon. The oldest service area in the street lighting was back in 1975. And as Kevin likes to point out, that was before I was born. And the latest was in 2010. Sorry, Kevin. Almost all of them, so 360 of these lights are owned by BC Hydro, and then we just manage the service area under an agreement with them. They basically take care of all the repairs and maintenance. We have to notify them of any streetlight outages or any other issues. And I'm just going to go back one. The picture on this slide is a conventional BC Hydro light. That's kind of what they look like. We actually own 8 lights in Forest Grove Estates, and this picture on this slide shows what that looks like. It's an ornamental light. It's not a kind of traditional street light, and we own those ourselves and maintain them. We also have 1 solar light in Royston down by Marine Drive, which has been a bit of a headache and is a long background to that. The work plan, last year we were just basically maintaining the lights that we owned, and we did have some meetings with the residents down in Royston about the solar street light, which is the picture shown in the top right here. this light was a bit of a challenge, especially during the winter when it didn't get a full charge, and so it didn't illuminate that intersection, which is quite busy. 2021, we'll continue to maintain lights we own. We are proposing to replace that solar light, and that would include working with BC Hydro and also undertaking some public notification of that. Going through the Union Bay Improvement District conversion and taking on that service area for street lighting. And also we may be involved with BC Hydro's LED replacement program. So that is a fairly large initiative province-wide. And we don't know exactly when it's going to hit the Comox Valley, but they're suggesting in the next 2 to 3 years to do the whole province. They're doing this to adhere to some regulations around PCBs, which are in the light ballasts. But some of the other benefits of this program are the reduced energy use. These lights last longer. They reduce light pollution. They actually provide a better level of lighting across the roadway. And so BC Hydro's included the cost of these replacements in a new rate that they are charging us. And that was in place as of December last year and is incorporated into the budgets that are being proposed today. So this is a slide just showing the requisition levels, which vary from service to service based on the number of lights in the service, number of properties that are paying into it, any available surpluses or reserve contributions. And that just kind of summarizes that. We did try a rainbow powered light down in Ryerson. It didn't work. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Mike, I see Director Grieve with his hand up.
Well, I think the problem with the rainbow light, it wasn't enough positive energy down there. But yeah, it's interesting that, we've been talking with Hydro for well on 23 years about replacing their Cobra head lights. And I guess it's a federal regulation that finally prompted them, nothing to do with altruism or concern with energy or the environment, but an actual order from the feds. So there you go. But I guess that order will also apply to the municipalities and their street lighting system, right?
Yeah, correct. Any of the lights within the municipalities that are owned by BC Hydro, which isn't all of them, but is a fair number of them within the municipalities, those would also be converted as part of their program right now. So
my understanding is some lights are in the rural areas, some lights are actually paid through the DRD, and some lights are the jurisdiction of highways, and some lights are the jurisdiction of BC Hydro. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The Ministry of Transportation does pay for some lights, typically on the major highways that are outside of our lighting service areas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not overly familiar with any of the lights that might be owned by BC Hydro. I definitely know all the ones that are in our service areas are BC Hydro owned lights, but we kind of pay for them through an agreement with BC Hydro. There may be some outside of our service areas that they own and possibly work with Ministry of Transportation to pay for.
I don't think even they know which lights are which, because if you remember back, the street light right beside the Oyster River Fire and Rescue was burned out for like a year and a half, and they kept, I think it was yourself that actually finally got it fixed, because they kept dealing with highways and said it was Hydro, and Hydro said it was highways or whatever. So that brings me to, with the new fire hall on Williams Beach Road, obviously we're going to have a light there. So that's something we're going to have to come up with and pay for through our Black Creek Oyster Bay, our fire service, or, the other thing as well was the fact that they wouldn't even let the fire hall put a flashing red light up there when the fire hall trucks left the hall. And even with the lights flashing and the siren going, the fire truck was rear-ended by a car, didn't see it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the exact location of the fire hall in relation to our street lighting service areas. We'll definitely take a look into that and talk to the fire services folks about where they're at, I guess, with lighting as far as that project. If it's in a service area, a lighting service area, we could add a light. If it's not, then we would have to maybe work with Ministry of Transportation to establish some additional lighting at that intersection.
And that intersection is definitely a flashing red light, because if you know anything about the hill and the turn there, it's going to be pretty dangerous trying to get on the highway. So that's a subject for a later discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Director Grieve. Director Arbor?
Thanks. That Royston light, I remember when it was put in, and it's interesting because it was one of those things that probably one of the first things that brought my attention to the Comox Valley Regional District. And being on Hornby and Denman, sometimes you're pretty disconnected from it. And I just remember, oh, well, they're trying cool things, some innovation. So they're trying to do something. And I remember stopping in when you guys installed it at the time. That must be like 10 years ago or 12 years ago, or a little while ago anyways. But there you go, innovation sometimes, I think it was worthwhile. There was a problem with servicing, I guess, to the site, but there was also community demand for some lighting in that area. So I'm glad to see that we're able to acknowledge when things don't work and find a solution and bring in a conventional light. Maybe I'll be curious to know if there's any plans for that very light, if we own it or not, and if so, could it go to a hall or somewhere else? If we could put it out to the communities to see if somebody wants to see a second life for it. And the other one is, I realized out of those 6 budgets, it's a broader question, but because it's one of our last budgets, I'll just ask it. So with the conversion in Union Bay, we're going to get a bunch of streetlights coming on board. So I imagine around the time of conversion, we'll just have to revise or introduce new with those service bylaws and consider budgets for those at the time. So those streetlights we might see them in July or August or June, or just a process question.
You won't review the budget again until next year. The budget will be adopted by the improvement district that will apply for the full year. Yes.
Thank you.
And I will just answer the question about the solar light. We do own it and we can repurpose it. So we'll look for a good location for that light for sure.
Great. Thank you. And that was my question. I was trying to avoid landfill for something like that. So great idea, Director Arbor. I don't see any other questions on the lighting service. On receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. And we have a recommendation.
Move recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, that's approved. Moving on to house numbering services, function 530 to 532 for receipt. Moved, and I can second, and over to staff.
Thank you, Chair and Directors, and Kevin DeBell to provide a summary.
Thank you very much again through the chair to the director. So this report covers our 3 small little house numbering services for the electoral areas. As indicated in the report, these electoral areas these service areas were established back in about the mid-70s. So once again, prior to Mike Zabarski being born, but after me. Collectively, we requisition a very small amount for these services annually, about $2,500. This largely goes to support GIS work that's required from time to time if new house numbers are being requested. So largely about 60 to 70% of the operating costs annually from these services are transferred over to our planning function to support the GIS work that is undertaken to support the ongoing house numbering services. I've provided the annual budget summaries in the report for your information, but would certainly welcome any questions.
And I think we do have a question from Director Arbor.
Is there any way, like we've always looked at efficiencies, that we could combine those 3 services into one and contribute equally? I'm looking to save at least 2 recommendations per year for generations to come.
Staff, any comments?
I can certainly take a stab at that through the chair to the director. So certainly we're always looking at opportunities to review our services, and if deemed feasible, look at how we can make them a little bit more efficient or certainly consolidate. Something that's certainly been on my radar for some time. So certainly, we can certainly take a look at that and potentially ahead of next financial planning cycle, bring back some recommendations in that regard.
Yeah, I would agree to that. I don't see any other comments. So on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. And then we have a few recommendations.
Can we move them all?
I will be okay with moving them all, if that's all right with, is that legislatively okay? Yep, okay. So all three recommendations moved and seconded at the same time. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all three are approved. Thank you. And Heritage Conservation Function 691 to 695 for receipt. Moved
Seconded.
and seconded and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Alana Mullally will present this budget and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Russell. Through Madam Chair to the directors. Oh, just give me a moment, Lisa. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. So I'm here to present our electoral area heritage conservation planning function 691 through 695. Before I get into that too much, I just wanted to speak to this photo a little bit. It actually comes up as a terrible photo, but the bigger purpose is to show you a glimpse of what the Canadian Register of Historic Places looks like. And you'll note that this is our exhibition grounds. This property was added to the register, the National Register, back in 2009, submitted as a nomination from the city of Courtenay, given that the property is in Courtenay's jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Oh, I could just gonna pop over there and get the clicker. Thank you. So I've put this first bullet up here about the service that regional districts, unlike municipalities, in order to undertake any kind of heritage conservation planning work, we need to have a heritage service, just in case there was any question about the 6 or why we have it, why it's not in our planning service. So it's just a requirement of the Local Government Act. So here we have 6 separate services, each for each jurisdiction. We've done a number of projects over the years, primarily driven and led by the community and community groups within each of the areas. As you might imagine, cultural heritage conservation is really well tied to a number of the strategic drivers, specifically community partnerships, Indigenous relations, and environmental stewardship. So the 6 budgets that I'll show you the tables for in just a moment, the primary revenue source is tax requisition. There are no changes to the requisitions in any of the services this year. And you'll note that there are increases in operating budgets for each of the services, and that's tied to the prior year surplus. So it's wholly commensurate with the increase in revenue. There are no capital or reserves for any of these services, and work within the services is supported by electoral area planning staff. When I talk about the 2021 work plan, I'll speak a little bit to this item, which is the apportionment of various work programs to each function, as well as some carry forward funding that we have. Okay, so here are the details. These are very lean budgets. And as I said previously, these have been, use of the budgets has largely been driven by community requests or organizations' requests to yourselves and your predecessors about specific projects. Just to give you a sense of the numbers there. So in 2021, there is a lot of potential for these services, but I will start with saying that we are a little bit limited given the full work plan that we have tasked electoral area planning staff with. At the bottom of this slide, I've highlighted a quote or included a quote from a recent report that was in a report, prepared by the First Peoples Cultural Council of BC. And I think this is a really helpful quote to help us understand what is intended by heritage conservation or what is included in heritage conservation. This brings me to highlight that we have a number of opportunities within these work plans, within these services, to decolonize heritage conservation. So you'll recognize this term. It was just used Friday in the presentation that we received as part of the community to community. and specifically some opportunities to use these services to implement some of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. So for example, one of the big areas where we're seeing a lot of work by the First Peoples Cultural Council is in reclamation of language. The family of languages under Kwakwala, they have been working with the First Peoples Councils to undertake a number of projects, both Campbell River, Cvrd, and I believe something is on the books for Comox Valley. In 2020, we had hoped to begin work on a heritage register. And that's why I brought you to that photo on the first or on the cover slide, as well as a related heritage alteration permit process. We weren't able to initiate this in 2020, but it is our hope that we will be able to start that work in 2021. A heritage register, just really briefly, this is a community register, and it's essentially a list of any of these kinds of things that are listed in this quote that are important to a community, that are sacred to a community. And inclusion on a community heritage register does a couple of things. One, it brings awareness and knowledge about a particular resource. But the other thing that it can do, if a community is interested, is afford some protection to the historic place. And it is a requirement once a community has a property that's been designated under the Heritage Act, so a property, not a building, but a property, to identify a community heritage register and list at a minimum those properties that have been designated, and then to adopt a heritage alteration permit process. So in the electoral areas, we have one property that has been designated, and that is the Union Bay Post Office and Jailhouse on that one property. And that property is owned by the Union Bay Historical Society. My reference here to the Couscous Sum cultural event, this represents the carry forward that is in the budget. There was an event, as you might recall, proposed for 2020 that wasn't able to take place. And so we'll work with the sponsors to see if that event has been adopted in any way for 2021, and those funds could be used for it. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Director Arbor?
Thanks. That last slide was very good. I'm glad you brought these ideas forward. I think it's 5 services. I think the 6 that you're mentioning is probably from your RGS brain with 6 jurisdictions in the Comox Valley.
Thank you. You're right.
But with these ones, yeah. There's 5. Otherwise, yeah, I agree. It'd be nice to see something happen. I especially like the notion of this service being used in our efforts with Comox First Nation, and I'd be quite happy to fund events and or initiatives in that regard. In regard to the registry, I think it's good to initiate, but I'll definitely have some caution around it. I was recently discussing with people who I won't name, but I was discussing, for example, that the train station here has heritage status, and that could very well hamper any kind of ultimate restoration of the station, because it makes everything as a building a lot more expensive to repair. And if it was not on the heritage, maybe there would be some savings in actually restoring the facility. So I realize that's not quite what you're talking about. You're talking about properties and permitting process for alterations, but that's something that would still be in the back of my mind around what are the cost implications to owners, and ensuring that what we put on there is supportable and sustainable in the long term, and doesn't lead to situations such as a train station, where I think that's more of a deterrent to potential people looking at the building. So yeah, great. And I guess a bit on status quo for all the budgets, but what I'm hearing today is maybe we see increased activity in those services in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Arbor. I have a question, if that's all right. I really love the direction that staff are taking this. The decolonization side of things, I think, is really is very exciting. I'm wondering, under the Heritage Register, if First Nations cultural sites are possible to register, or is that something that's there already? And through Madam Chair to the directors, yes. So if we were to pull up the National Register right now, you would see a number of sites that have been identified as Indigenous sacred places. There are a number of archaeological sites that are included on the National Register as well. And then, being cautious to tell the story, but not to reveal anything that could put those sites in any kind of danger.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, even as I was looking at this list, thinking about decolonizing the heritage conservation processes and then looking at this system that's in BC, the Heritage Register. I think there's a fine line to walk there. And I think we would want to work really closely with Indigenous representatives to ensure that we're getting it right. Absolutely. I mean, I can see potentially a benefit. I remember KFN highlighting where there were some sites where there were cultural burial sites that were being desecrated, but would registering them provide any level of protection more above what's there already? And I'm also considering, the KFN's cultural policy, their cultural sites policy, how that might interact with this service as well. Could staff comment? Sure. Through Madam Chair to the directors, on that latter point, I think you're absolutely right that the timing is serendipitous. Comox has adopted their cultural heritage policy, and I think these services, as well as potentially planning, would be the appropriate services to look at how we might, as an organization, help to implement the cultural heritage policy. So I think that piece is clear. The former piece about whether or not adding a resource to a register affords it more protection. Generally, yes, it does. But I think in the context of the cultural heritage policy, it would really just be about taking Comox's lead, for example. Right. What would be helpful? What would not be helpful? Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it up to staff to, bring this item forward to Comox First Nation when it's appropriate, and you can have a discussion from there. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation. We all 5 functions, 691, 692, 693, 94, and 95 be approved.
Second.
And seconded. And comments? Seeing none, that is carried. Okay, we're now moving into new business. And I'm wondering if now would be the appropriate time to move that we were going to discuss, I believe, a letter of support from our delegation this morning from Denman Housing. Shall we?
Yeah.
We can add that to the agenda. Is that an appropriate time? Okay, so I'll need a motion. So moved. And
second.
I can seconded. Anyone opposed? And that's carried. So it'll be the third or it'll be at the end of the agenda anyways. Okay. If that's all right. So under new business, the Emergency Operations Center update for receipt. Moved.
Second.
And I'll second it. And thank you. I just wanted to give an update for the directors who weren't at the EOC about just just the tone of the discussion, because I know some of the conversations that were happening in the community, and Director Arbor alluded to this, that last week there was quite a lot of a heightened sense of around COVID, around the spread in the community, especially around the school districts, and what we were seeing in terms of, potential impact because of the community not maybe obeying the rules to the best of their ability. So I first of all really want to commend staff that they were able to pull together an emergency EOC meeting on very short notice so that some of this information could kind of be discussed. Basically what I heard from Dr. Enns was that really there was no new messaging that was coming from the province, and that it was very difficult for them to tailor any kind of messaging specifically for our community, even though we were seeing numbers. And I think it wasn't just the rise in numbers, but it was also the seeing down the, down the calendar that spring break was coming. And often at break times, we see another surge in numbers as people maybe relax some of their socialize a little bit more during those break times. So, I think staff did a really good job of hearing what Dr. Enns had to say in terms of there's not really a lot of tailored messaging that can come. And that the regional district itself doesn't provide any of this messaging, that we just, what Island Health gives us is what we message, that we're not the lead in messaging. And that even Island Health said, well, they're not the lead either, that the province is the lead. So we're kind of tier 3 under everybody else. And I know this has been communicated before, but I guess just with the rising numbers, it was still a little bit of a shock to hear. But I thought I would maybe hand it over to staff to describe how some really innovative ideas that they've come up with about how to respond to the rising numbers and to the upcoming spring break sort of season. So maybe will I hand it over to Howie? Would you be able to kind of describe what you've come up with in terms of a communication plan?
I would be happy to chair and through all to the directors. The information officers are from the EOC and myself. We did hear the challenge that we've had, and you've expressed them well to the group already. But so what we are doing is we've gone forward and taken upon ourselves as a regional district to look at some tools like doing a full page ad, just repeating some of the basic messaging, which is, I think, what we're getting a feel of is been kind of missing. And I know Charmaine and Dr. Enns has been really good with saying that, we've said it enough, but I think we're just seeing the numbers and cases. I think it's still something we need to keep saying. So we're putting in a full page ad in the local papers, which we found this morning. The Island Health will be doing some of the same thing. They'll be putting some pieces in the paper with a bit of the prevention messaging, but mainly to focus on the vaccination piece of what age groups, what numbers are they're reaching. So ours will be more focused at the basic prevention messaging in time for spring break. We are also just secured the main road mobile roadsides to put them out over by the 17th bridge, like we do with boil water, and we will have again them repeating the flashing of the basic prevention measures for that as well. And another tool that we're going to which is great, and I think there is some more viewership coming in, is having Chair Kettler offer her YouTube messages, because we do find that is really a spot where we can create the message, repeat the provincial health messages, but also provide some of our local direction on those messages as well. So that's the area we're focusing on now, and we're really just going to be reaching out a lot more with Patricia at Island Health, who is their local communications person, who has been very open in contacting us now in the last few days. So.
Thanks for that, Howie. Can I ask if we're going to be using the Connect Rocket mechanism, like the cell phone messaging?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Yeah, so that is a tool we're leaving kind of in our pocket right now. We're just not sure, the audience, sometimes we're thinking they may not take that so well, but we think it's a really good, important tool. And if we see the cases go up, during spring break or after spring break, we might consider launching that just as another tool to get more serious message out.
Thank you. Do directors have any questions or comments? Okay. I don't see any. And Director Grieve, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think I was reading recently where you almost have a muscle memory this time of year that relates to this time of year last year. So there's definitely some kind of psychological imprint that is happening again. People are obviously fatigued with the whole issue. And of course, with the semi-botched rollout of vaccine from the government, it just plays into that whole disconnect and that lack of interest by a large number of the population. I've heard where perhaps 30% of the population won't get inoculated anyway. So we're still going to be walking around with masks on for, maybe years to come. So it's not a great message out there, but I think the big thing is to keep it consistent. I think by easing up on the gas pedal, we're not doing anybody any favors. All you have to do is drive by the pubs at night and you see the parking lots full. So, you tell me the people are observing all the protocols. They just are not, because much like, you're supposed to have your dog on a leash in our parks and in our greenways. And, there's a great percentage of people just don't think that applies to them. So we have that segment of the population. I've even had people say, "Oh, you're one of those because you're wearing a mask." My son was working in a job site, and one of the crews came in. They refused to wear their mask, even though it's mandated by WCB. So I mean, how do you go the last mile here? Because that's what we're at. So I think we got to hammer the message. I think you're right in that we have to put out a little outlay of our own money. I think we just put 100,000 from our restart into this function anyway. So let's use it wisely, and hopefully the rational people out there will prevail. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. Yes, and thanks. Now that staff have outlined some of the communications sort of channels that they'll be using, that we as directors can use some of those channels to sort of point people in the direction of what the messaging is. Seeing no other questions on receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Did we have any communications from? Oh, you haven't. We did. Do you want to do? Oh, that's the addendum. Yes, please. So under new business, we have the Director Arbor. Did you want to make a motion?
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate that we have a lot on the go, and that typically we'd wait a meeting, but we will wait a meeting before considering anything from Denman, the Denman group. But being in the community, I recognize that this is a very important point for them in where they're at, especially after the project didn't fly at the other side, and the need to preserve momentum. And I think that many Denman Islanders are looking to their local government for support. So I would propose the following, that the ASC recommends to the Cvrd board a letter of support to the Denman Green project for the purpose of applications to the Islands Trust and BC Housing. And further, that staff prepare an analysis to consider potential support in 2021 for their development cost requests. And I'd like to, part of why I'm well, actually, I'll see if there's a seconder, then I'll speak to it.
I will second that. And I'm just wondering would you be able to provide Lisa the text of that, or Lisa, have you got that?
With great pleasure. Okay. I even tried to handwrite it properly. Thanks. So speaking to the motion, we're in budget season right now, and I mean, there are options I'm aware of around rural community grants, but we just sort of locked in the amounts, and I know there's lots of requests coming from Denman, so there might be some difficult decisions there. But also it'll help put our minds to what is difficult for the regional district, which is we're spending so much time and effort on housing in the valley, except on Hornby and Denman. And the Islands Trust is incapable outside of bylaws to provide other sort of supports. I know there's been discussions around having the islands join the coalition. I actually not sure that that's the right course, but because those islands are going to see 2 or 3 projects in a generation, and it just so happens that they're happening now. So I think a little bit of support now could help hook in BC Housing. On Denman, we did the same. The Cvrd is a celebrated partner on Hornby Island around the Beulah Creek, and the role we played there around the 26 units that are moving forward. And I believe there's a similar opportunity, but it is a bit timely in their case because I think they're looking to move quickly, but there's a role for diligence of staff. So that's why the recommendation just asks for an analysis for now and a letter of support. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions? Director Greaves, do we need to read out the motion again, or are you okay?
I'm perfectly fine.
Okay.
We get to see it again at the board anyway.
We do. Okay. So on that recommendation then, is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. Thank you. And I don't believe we have any addendum to approve. So I will, if anyone wants to make a motion to terminate. Termination moved.
Second.
Seconded. Any opposed? And that's carried. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This is awesome. I have a